is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. You are watching the live desk here on GB News. Coming up this Monday lunchtime.
You thought it was your right to play God with our children's lives. The heartbreaking words of a mother at today's sentencing of Lucy Letby, the most prolific child serial killer of modern times.
Letby refuses to appear in court for her sentencing, a move branded cowardly by the Prime Minister, who says an inquiry into her crimes should now happen as quickly as possible. We're live from Manchester Crown Court.
In other news today, all the leaves are brown and the sky is grey. California declares a state of emergency as even Death Valley is flooded by Storm Hilary. And then an earthquake hits for good measure.
Plus, the pin-up bachelor boy, because he may not be the young ones very long. Cliff Richard releases his 2024 calendar at the age of 82. First, the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Pip, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom at 12:01. The mother of a baby murdered by Lucy Letby says her experience in hospital was like something out of a horror story. Impact statements by parents are currently being heard at Manchester Crown Court before the former nurse is sentenced later. One mother said she was haunted by vivid images that Letby had destroyed her life after 2 of her triplets were killed. The 33-year-old was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 16. Letby has refused to attend court for sentencing. The Prime Minister has said this morning the inquiry into Letby's crimes should happen as quickly as possible.
Well, I think the important thing for the inquiry to do is make sure that families get the answers that they need, that it is possible for us to learn the lessons from what happened, everything conducted transparently and to happen as quickly as possible. Those are the objectives that we want for the inquiry, and we'll make sure that it's set up to deliver on those aims.
The mother of two of Letby's victims, one of whom survived, called her absence in court a final act of wickedness from a coward. Well, Shadow Prisons Minister Ellie Reeves says it's shocking.
It's cowardly behaviour on the part of Lucy Letby. She should be in court today to hear the victim impact statements, to hear the devastating effect of her awful crimes on the families, and the fact that she can't be compelled to be there. It is frankly shocking.
In other news now, a 50-year-old man will appear in court later following the major police data breach in Northern Ireland. He's been charged with possessing documents likely to be useful to terrorists. It's after the details of 10,000 officers and staff were published online by mistake. The leak contains the surname and initial of every employee, their rank, where they're based and the unit they work in. Police believe the information is now in the hands of dissident Republicans. The government is calling on housing associations, social landlords and developers to review tenancy contracts to help childminders work from home. Many living in rented accommodation are prevented from using their homes for business purposes. The Department for Education says too often prospective childminders are having the door slammed in their face. The government is also bringing in measures to encourage more people to care for school-aged children, including a £1,200 start-up grant. From today, Londoners are eligible for a cash grant of up to £2,000 for cars that don't comply with ULEZ policies. The Mayor of London's scrappage scheme will cost around £110 million. It begins today, ahead of the expanded ultra-low emission zone, which will cover all London boroughs from the 29th of August. But the policy faces opposition in other parts of government, with a council leader in Hertfordshire refusing to erect signs warning drivers of the new low-emission zone. Conservative London Assembly member Neil Garrett says Sadiq Khan's new ULEZ requirements are happening too quickly.
He's really rushed this through. He only announced in November last year that he was going to do this. So people have had less than a year at a time of, real financial pressure, potentially to try to replace their car. And now we're seeing this evidence that the benefits that are touted for the ULEZ expansion are either very small or, there's question marks about the evidence behind them. I think the whole policy really needs a rethink. Is this the best way to clean up London's air, and have people been given enough time to get ready for it? I don't think they have.
England captain Millie Bright says the team will definitely bounce back from their World Cup final loss to Spain. The skipper says she's proud of the girls and that it isn't the end of the journey. The Lionesses are now on their way back from Australia. Both Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and Lib Dem's Ed Davey have called for them to be given honours. And today, Britain's oldest person gets a year older. Ethel May Caterham from Hampshire is celebrating her 114th birthday. The super centenarian was born in 1909. Well, happy birthday, Ethel. Have a wonderful day. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, though, it's back to Mark and Pip.
Lucy Letby, Britain's most prolific child killer, is set to spend the rest of her life in prison when she's sentenced this afternoon at Manchester Crown Court. But she's not expected to be in the dock, as she's refusing to leave her cell. Letby was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Well, the court, which has just adjourned until 12:30, has been listening to impact statements this morning from the families of the babies that she had killed. The mother of one of those babies saying Letby had decided to play God with our children's lives. The neonatal nurse deliberately injected the babies with air, force-fed others milk and poisoned 2 infants with insulin.
The murders make her the worst child serial killer in modern British times. In a statement read to the court, the mother of child I said, "I don't think we will ever get over the fact that our daughter was tortured till she had no fight left in her, and everything she went through over her short life was deliberately done by someone who was supposed to protect her and help her come home where she belonged. We were both absolutely broken that someone could do something so evil to our precious little girl. And this has had a massive effect on our family, even until this day."
Well, the Prime Minister called Letby's actions in not appearing today as cowardly. He said an inquiry into how she was allowed to kill so many should be held as quickly as possible. Well, let's speak now to consultant forensic psychologist Dr. Kerry Nixon. We're hoping to speak to him shortly. Let's get criminal lawyer Nick Freeman while we wait for Kerry to join us. Nick, thanks for joining us. We are being told the court is likely to come back in the next 20 minutes for the sentencing remarks. The prosecution has asked or called for a whole life tariff, and she would be, the only, I think, fourth woman to receive such a sentence.
Yeah, there's 3 previous women, Rose West, and 2 others who have received this. So it's extremely rare. It relates to multiple murders, premeditated. Obviously here we're dealing with the most vulnerable of children, the most vulnerable people in our society, and a huge breach of trust. So all the aggravating features are there. She's over 21, and I think a whole life tariff is inevitable.
And just explain to us, Nick, what a whole life tariff means. Does that mean that she will never get out of prison? She will spend the rest of her life there?
It does, unless there are extraordinary, compassionate grounds for releasing her at some stage, at a well-advanced stage of a sentence. But in essence, it means she will never be released from prison. Normally you receive a life sentence, and when you receive a life sentence, there's sometimes a minimum sentence imposed. That means that is the time you do. A whole life tariff means what it says, it's the whole of your life behind bars.
Is it also significant that her defence team offered no mitigating circumstances in their comments this morning?
Whatever they said, I don't think will make the slightest difference to the sentence. I think the writing's on the wall. The judge really doesn't have a discretion in how to deal with this. There's only one sentence that she can receive, and that's a whole life tariff. And that there is really no useful mitigation that can be advanced. It would not achieve anything, and therefore it would simply be wasting the court's time.
Now, Lucy Letby is refusing to appear in the dock for her sentencing or to hear those impact statements from the babies' families. She has the power. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. She has the power to say that she does not want to appear in the dock.
It sounds ridiculous. It sounds perverse. It's a ridiculous anomaly in the law that I've been calling for it to be changed for some time now. And I think this case will prove to be the catalyst. The judge certainly has no power from a legislative perspective to do anything to force her attendance. She's in custody. Whether or not the prison authorities decide to use the expression lawful enforcement, and when the judge asks for her to attend, they might liberally interpret that as meaning we're going to enforce her lawfully to attend in compliance with the judge's request, which in essence will mean picking her up and putting her in the dock. I think the law will be changed inevitably now to force defendants. There's a Victims Act that's going through at the moment. It's due to go through for final stages in November, and I think legislation the relevant provisions will be rushed through in relation to this aspect of that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you're dealing with somebody, one of the worst offenders that you can imagine, someone who's going to receive a whole life tariff, what is the penalty that you're going to impose? And I think it's one of the unusual situations where you have to say she can be forced to attend, and she can be forced physically to attend, so that first of all, the complainants, the victims' parents can see her, they can see justice being done, and also the person, the defendant, has the opportunity of hearing the victim's impact statements, which is critical for her and for the judicial system. Another approach, of course, would be to put cameras in her cell and make sure that she is she hears, she is aware of what's happening, she is aware of what's said. Obviously, that's something she can't do anything about, and that is what I would do as an expeditious step in relation to these proceedings, so that she can't circumnavigate the lacuna that currently exists. Because if the authorities don't listen, it's too much of a slap in the face, a final insult for the families. I would have cameras placed in a cell and make her listen. And that, of course, would be that's something that I think would satisfy the case as much as it can be satisfied at the moment.
Yeah, and Sir Robert Buckton, former minister, outlined that on GB News here on Friday. And there is precedent that evidence is given from cells, police cells or prison cells by video link for cases.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that might be what happens here. The government have been talking about trying to force her to attend. I don't know whether the government has spoken to the prison authorities, but in essence, I'm unaware of any legal power that can force her attendance. And of course, the problem is if they physically pick her up without that legal power, she may have an action for assault and other civil actions, which will be ludicrous, but they may actually exist in law, because you can't just physically pick someone up without having the relevant authority, and we can't just make up that law. Yeah. So, the law needs to be in place to protect people, to make sure that she is in the dock, she listens to what happens, not just in her case, but in other cases as well. And this isn't the first time we're confronted with this situation, and I have to say the government seemed to be particularly slow in reacting. It's a situation that should never be encountered, particularly because of the families that are concerned. They should be able to see. We say justice needs to be seen to be done, and at that crucial stage, they're being deprived. It's wrong.
Nick, thank you for those thoughts. Stay with us, of course, as the sentencing remarks expected in the next 20 minutes or so.
Let's cross to Manchester Crown Court and speak with GB News North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, you have been covering this case for the last 10 months or so. The case will resume. The judge will start making his remarks in the next few minutes. But this morning must have been so emotionally charged hearing those victims' impact statements from the babies' families.
It was indeed, and it was as we suspected. Lucy Letby refused to appear in court this morning as we heard those victim impact statements from the parents of each child that the former nurse has been found guilty of attacking. First of all, we heard from the prosecution, Nick Johnson, KC. He suggested and submitted to the judge that Lucy Letby should indeed be awarded the whole life order. We then heard from Benjamin Myers, KC, of the defence, and he said effectively there was nothing he could add in terms of mitigation now the jury had found her guilty of those various offences. We then moved on to those impact statements, and as you say, they were highly emotionally charged. I don't mind saying that it did bring a tear to my eye, in fact, listening in. Some of the statements were read out by a member of the prosecution. Some of them we heard from the parents directly, and of course that was incredibly difficult for them to do and incredibly difficult for us all in court to hear. I've picked out a couple of the key statements from a few key phrases, from those statements. For example, the parents of child A and child B, we heard a joint statement from them. Child A was murdered and child B was an attempted murder charge. The mother of those two children said to Lucy Letby, "We hope you have a very long life and spend every day suffering for what you've done. You are nothing." The mother of child C, who was also murdered, described it as something like out of a horror story. And then finally, from the father of child O and child P, he said, "Lucy Letby has destroyed our lives. The anger and the hatred I have for her will never go away. It has destroyed me as a man and as a father." Now, of course, these statements will now be taken into consideration by Justice Goss, but even without them, now that we know Lucy Letby is the most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history, there was really never any doubt that she would most likely receive a whole life order for her crimes.
And Sophie, throughout this process and today, where they are seeing justice being done, the thing that's missing is they still don't understand why she did this.
That's absolutely right. We've never heard any kind of motive. Lucy Letby, of course, throughout the entirety of this process, ever since her arrest back in 2018, has always maintained her innocence. She has always said that she is not guilty of all of those 22 charges on that original indictment. We, of course, now know that she was not guilty of 2 found by the jury, but that she was guilty on 14 of those crimes, including 7 murders between June of 2015 and June of 2016. And I think that's the real concern of those families, is that, OK, they may now know what happened medically and ultimately going forward for their child, but what they don't know, as you say, is what happened, why what happened.
Sophie, was any reason given in court as to why Lucy Letby is refusing to appear in the dock, or was it just made as a statement? She's not going to come.
Well, one morning we did notice that she just hadn't appeared in the dock, and there were questions among the media as to why that may be. Of course, it may have been due to illness. We didn't know at that time. Justice Goss then questioned the defence as to why the defendant hadn't appeared in court that morning and going forward. And after a short investigation by Benjamin Myers, KC of the defence, he came back to Justice Goss to inform him that it was the decision of Lucy Letby that she was refusing and that she would no longer appear in the dock.
Now, the other aspect to this is that this is the culmination of these particular cases after 10 months. But now we have police saying they are going back through some 4,000 neonatal cases to look at perhaps what could be other attempts or indeed other deaths as a result of her actions.
Indeed, I think Cheshire Constabulary have stressed that that number 4,000 isn't necessarily 4,000 incidents of guilt. It just happens to be there were 4,000 babies that Lucy Letby may or may not have cared for along that time period. Now, that investigation will continue. Of course, we don't know too much at this point, and realistically, it's a moot point when it comes to Lucy Letby right now, because if she's already going to receive the whole life order, then realistically, it's not going to affect how long she will remain in prison. She will be remaining in prison indefinitely, most likely anyway. But what it will do is give families answers to questions that they may now have.
Sophie Reaper, we will come back to you live outside Manchester Crown Court. The judge is expected to start speaking in the next 10 minutes or so.
Just to update you as well, a bit more coming from Downing Street. The government looking at changing the law to ensure criminals do attend their sentencing in court. Downing Street just saying. The Prime Minister's official spokesman saying to reporters, we're looking at changing the law to make sure attendance happens. It's something we'll bring forward in due course.
You're with the live desk on GB News. Stay with us. The weather's next.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Pretty warm and sunny across much of the south today. The breeze picking up further north where there is a bit more cloud. We've got some wet weather across northwest Scotland from this area of low pressure and this weather front. But high pressure dominating across the south. It'll add a bit of mist and fog first thing, and still a fair bit of cloud around in some areas, but generally turning sunny now across the Midlands, eastern and southern England. A few scattered showers over central and southern Scotland, but more persistent rain as the winds pick up across the Highlands and the Western Isles of Scotland. Temperatures here in the high teens, but head further south, we're getting into the 20s, mid-20s across the southeast, 26, possibly even 27 Celsius. A few more showers this evening, perhaps parts of Wales and then northeast England could see a few, and the rain will push in across Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight, tending to ease off as it does so, but nevertheless a fairly damp and blustery night here. Across the south it stays dry, and everywhere pretty warm nights, temperatures holding up 15 or even 16 degrees Celsius in some urban areas. On to Tuesday, a bit of a mess. Again, generally speaking, drier and sunnier across the south, more cloud further north. A few more showers tomorrow for Wales and northern England, and more to come across parts of Scotland, although the Highlands and the Western Isles turning a little drier. Again, the sunnier skies will be across the south, and that's where the top temperatures will be, once more getting into the mid-20s. Bye for now.
That warm feeling inside. From boxed boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
You're watching the live desk on GB News. Lucy Letby, Britain's most prolific child killer, is set to spend the rest of her life in prison when she's sentenced this afternoon at Manchester Crown Court. She's not expected to be in the dock as she's refusing to leave her cell. She was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Well, that sentencing is due in the next few minutes at Manchester Crown Court. But let's speak now to consultant forensic psychologist Dr. Kerry Nixon. Kerry, thank you for joining us, because we've heard the impact statements from the families this morning, and one of the phrases that's cropped up is their assertion that Letby played God effectively with their children. I mean, is that one way of trying to understand what went on?
I think the one thing in this case at the moment is there's so many unanswered questions, and that's why it's heartbreaking for the families that they're not going to be able to face them. Often families scrutinise the face of, the killer, the murderer in the case, to try and answer that question. Why have they done this? So the fact that they're not going to be able to look her in the face and try to read what's been going on for her is what is heartbreaking.
And just trying to get into her head, which obviously is nigh on impossible, but in terms of why she would refuse to appear in court for sentencing, what might her reasoning be, do you think?
There could be many, many reasons. It could be, for a lot of offenders, it's power, still having that control at that last moment, not wanting to face the families and see, you know, what she's caused. So there's many reasons. And, you know, you mentioned power at the beginning and you know, playing God. And she was in the ultimate position of power. And there was that awful quote that somebody mentioned that she said, "Trust me, I'm my nurse." So, you know, power and control is absolutely central to this.
Now, we understand that it may be a whole life tariff. Certainly that's been asked or called for by the prosecution. Even if that's not handed down, it will be a substantial sentence. What is likely to happen in prison? Will there be an attempt medically to try and get her to explain what went on and her reasoning?
Yes, she will be worked with. The psychologist will assess her and probation officers. There will be a lot of work. There'll also be, I imagine, it'll be very high risk. I imagine that she will be potentially, you know, on suicide watch. There's going to be a lot of work for a lot of people to do over the coming years.
Now, the other aspect is that she has not admitted anything, even though she's been found guilty. Is that something that could continue for her imprisonment, that she does not acknowledge what's happened even to herself?
Absolutely. And we see this a lot. I've worked with many, many offenders who continue to say that they're innocent for many years to come. And that's what makes it really difficult for families. That they don't ever receive those answers. And often there is never an answer, because even the answer doesn't help them have closure. So one of the families mentioned that there's never going to be closure for them. They're never going to be able to deal with this. But to have somebody still denying it and to have no insight into why is what's really, really awful for the families.
There has been plenty of comment over the weekend since the verdicts came in on Friday of, oh, she doesn't look like a child killer. Not that you really know what a child killer should look like anyway. I mean, it was just ridiculous or maybe badly worded. But I guess it's about the fact that she had, to all intents and purposes, a very regular upbringing, unlike the other serial killer, Rose West, for example.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this so shocking. I think all of us have sat here in shock thinking how, you know, the smiling picture of her holding the baby, the fact that she herself was ill as a baby, and that's what made her want to become a neonatal nurse. I mean, it's just, we can't imagine it. I think as women, as mothers, we can never imagine it. But in this case, somebody who spent her whole childhood saying to people that she wanted to help children, you just can't reconcile that in your head. There's many times that people have committed horrific acts and they don't look like a typical stereotypical killer. But in this case, it's just that everything, her upbringing, her education, her social life, her friends, nothing fits with the acts that we've seen her commit.
Dr. Kerry Dixon, consultant forensic psychologist, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I know you've got patients that you need to go and see now, but thank you for joining us and bringing your thoughts here on GB News.
Thank you very much.
Lucy Letby's sentencing is due to start shortly, with the baby killer predicted to be handed a full life term.
Well, we had, of course, those impact statements this morning at the court, at Manchester Crown Court. Earlier, mother of child A, who was murdered by Letby, and child B, who she had attempted to kill, said, "You thought it was your right to play God with our children's lives. Little did we know you were waiting for us to leave so you could attack the one thing that gave us a reason to carry on in life. Maybe you thought by doing this you would be remembered forever. But I want you to know my family will never think of you again. From this day, you are nothing."
The mother of child D has also spoken to the court and said Lucy Letby had a chance to say something to us all, parents of the victims, and she had only one word: unimaginable. Her wicked sense of entitlement and abuse of her role as a trusted nurse is a scandal. Lucy Letby, you failed God and the plans he had. You even called it fate. You were clearly disconnected with God.
Well, we're expecting the sentencing remarks from Mr Justice Goss to start at Manchester Crown Court shortly. We'll have that live for you here on GB News. But let's get an update now on the other headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Here are the headlines at 12:32. The worst child serial killer in modern British history is due to be sentenced in a few moments. Impact statements by parents have been heard this morning at Manchester Crown Court. The mother of one baby murdered by Lucy Letby says her experience in hospital was like something out of a horror story. One mother said she was haunted by vivid images and that Letby had destroyed her life after 2 of her triplets were killed. The 33-year-old was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 16. Well, we can take you straight to Manchester Crown Court now for that sentencing.
Her absence. I shall deliver the sentencing remarks as if she was present to hear them, and I direct that she is provided with a transcript of my remarks and copies of the victim personal statements read to the court. Lucy Letby, over a period of almost 13 months between June 2015 and June 2016, when in your mid-20s and employed as a neonatal nurse in the Countess of Chester Hospital in Chester, with specialist training in intensive care, you murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others. In the case of one of them, trying on separate occasions 2 weeks apart to murder her. You are now to be sentenced for your crimes. I order payment of the statutory surcharge in the appropriate amount. You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies, and in gross breach of the trust that all citizens place in those who work in the medical and caring professions. The babies you harmed were born prematurely, and some were at risk of not surviving. But in each case, you deliberately harmed them, intending to kill them. In your evidence, you said that hurting a baby is completely against everything that being a nurse is, as indeed it should be. You also claimed you never did anything that was meant to hurt a baby, and only ever did your best to care for them. That was but one of the many lies you were found to have told in this case. There is no doubt that you are intelligent and outwardly were a very conscientious, hard-working, knowledgeable, confident and professional nurse, which enables you repeatedly to harm babies on the unit without arousing suspicion for some time. You prided yourself in your competence. Your fellow neonatal nurses spoke very highly of you, and several of them became your close friends. Having started as a Band 5 nurse at the Countess of Chester in 2012, you became a mentor to student nurses, and in the spring of 2015 gained the qualification that enabled you to care for the sickest babies on the unit, or those requiring the most intensive care. You relished being in the intensive care nursery. Your messages to colleagues revealed an interest in babies that were on or were coming to the unit who had uncommon medical conditions. The methods you employed to carry out your murderous intent were only revealed by the later detailed investigation into the events of and surrounding the collapses and deaths of the babies, which commenced in 2018. there was premeditation, calculation, and cunning in your actions. You specifically targeted twins and latterly triplets. Some babies were healthy, others had medical issues of which you were aware. The great majority of your victims suffered acute pain as a result of what you did to them. They all fought for survival. Some, sadly, struggled in vain and died. You used a number of different ways to try to kill them, thereby misleading clinicians into believing the collapses had or might have had a natural cause or were a consequence of a developing medical condition. You took opportunities to harm babies when staff were in breaks or away from babies. On some occasions, you falsified records to indicate there were signs of a deterioration before a collapse occurred. You knew that the last thing anyone working in the unit would or did think was that someone caring for the babies was deliberately harming them. As the number of unexpected and unexplained collapses and deaths escalated, senior doctors started to think the unthinkable and consider the possibility that someone was, in fact, deliberately harming the babies, and you were identified as the common factor. You had a detached enthusiasm for the resuscitations and what followed. You endeavoured to impress colleagues and clinicians and sought reassurance from them as to your competence and skills, and would message others to the effect that no one was at fault. On occasions, you cruelly and callously made inappropriate remarks to some of the grieving parents at the time of or in the immediate aftermath of a death. When the homes of both you and your parents were searched, confidential documents relating to babies, including handover and resuscitation sheets and notes and blood gas readings, were found, and there were entries in a diary recording relevant events. Handover sheets relating to all but the first 4 of the babies had been taken from the unit and kept by you. I am satisfied you started to keep these documents after those initial offences in June 2015 as morbid records of the dreadful events surrounding the collapses of your victims and what you had done to them. You had a fascination with the babies and their families, which extended to making repeated searches on Facebook for their parents, sometimes immediately following the events, and on occasions much later. A piece of paper with dent writing on both sides, setting out your thoughts and feelings, was found in the first search of your home in 2018. Amongst the phrases you wrote were, "The world is better off without me," and "I am evil, I did this." The impact of your crimes has been immense, as disclosed by the deeply moving personal statements that have been read to the court this morning. The lives of newborn or relatively newborn babies were ended almost as soon as they began, and lifelong harm has been caused, all in horrific circumstances. Loving parents have been robbed of their cherished children, and others have to live with the physical and mental consequences of your actions. Siblings have been deprived of brothers and sisters. You have caused deep psychological trauma, brought enduring grief and feelings of guilt, caused strains in relationships and disruption to the lives of all the families of all your victims. It is no part of my function to reach conclusions as to the underlying reason or reasons for your actions, nor could I, for they are known only to you. I must pass appropriate sense of seriousness of your offences, the facts of which I now describe briefly.
Just to explain, there are legal restrictions on some of the things that we can show or relay from the court. That's why it goes to that slate, indicating Mr Justice Goss is going through some details that cannot be broadcast, but clearly he is now setting out in detail the various charges that were proved against Letby. As he said, it's not his part to try and work out the reasons as to why she did what she did, but clearly he said each case had been deliberately harmed, each baby intending to kill them, intelligent, outwardly conscientious and competent.
In common with all nurses, you knew from your training the dangers caused by air getting into the venous system, and that air embolus was very rarely encountered in clinical practice.
Again, the video feed has been suspended. We do apologise if you are listening to us on the radio for any distressing content, but the judge, Mr Justice James Goss, his remarks so far has said that Lucy Letby had what he described as a detached enthusiasm for resuscitation, for resuscitating those babies. She cruelly and callously made inappropriate remarks to some of the grieving parents, and documents that were found at her home and at her parents' home, diary entries. The judge said she kept them as morbid records of the dreadful crimes that she had committed. She was fascinated with the babies and their families, even undertaking extensive searches on Facebook.
Yeah, one of the diary entries, I am evil, I did this. Mr Justice Goss telling the Crown Court there was premeditation, calculation and cunning in your actions. He said that Letby had relished being in the intensive care unit where she took an interest in uncommon complications, targeting twins and triplets. The judge saying the defendant priding herself on a professionalism which enabled her to start harming children without suspicion.
And how she did that was she took the opportunity to harm the babies when the staff were away, because the judge said she knew that the last thing colleagues would expect is that a professional like her, somebody who'd always wanted to work with babies, was actually harming them. Mr Justice Goss is passing sentence at the moment. We will bring you his remarks again as soon as we can. Lucy Letby is not in court for sentencing. She is refusing to attend. We can cross to our correspondent, Sophie Reaper, who is at Manchester Crown Court. Sophie has been covering the case for months. Sophie, tell us a little bit more about what you've been hearing.
Well, as we know, Lucy Letby has refused to appear in the dock for this sentencing. But at the start of his remarks, Justice Goss announced that he would treat this as though she were in the dock. And he did tell us that last week. And the reason for this is to make sure that those families of the victims who are present in court today feel as though justice truly is being delivered, even though Lucy Letby is not in the dock. She's refused to come up to face those families and to face her sentencing head on. Now, some of the remarks so far, of course, as you say, we are in the middle of it, but because of certain sensitivities with the names involved that we're not allowed to report for anonymity reasons, that's why we're not hearing certain elements to this sentencing. But some things we've already heard. He said, Lucy Letby, over a period of almost 13 months, when in your mid-20s and employed as a neonatal nurse, you murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others. Of course, one of those babies... Oh, I think we can go back to court now. I'm just hearing, so we'll go back to Justice Goss for more of the sentencing.
Yeah, I think we just lost the feed again, Sophie. As you were indicating, just to explain to people, because of the legal circumstances, clearly some details in terms of identification of the families cannot be gone into. But just give us a sense of you being in court again this morning after these months where you followed the case, about how the families are and how they've been coping with this day.
Well, it's been emotional from the offset. Of course, this is something that the families, since Lucy Letby's arrest back in 2018, have known is going to be coming. They've had time to prepare for it, but of course, one can never be fully prepared to hear the graphic details that we've heard in the evidence over the past 10 months. Today, it reached a real peak, though, in terms of the emotions felt in the courtroom. There was not a dry eye in the House as we heard statements, victim impact statements from those family members of each of the babies that Lucy Letby has been found guilty of attacking. Some of them were read out as in statement form by a member of the prosecution because the family members felt simply that they would be unable to cope with the emotion of reading it out in person. Some of them, however, did feel they could cope and did read it out in person. For example, the mother of baby C, her son was murdered by Lucy Letby, and she talked about this and the impact that it has had on her since losing her son. She described it as something like out of a horror story. One can only imagine the heartbreak that all of these families have felt over the past 10 months. It's truly so harrowing.
Incredibly gruelling for the jurors as well, Sophie. Are all the jurors back in court today for sentencing?
Several of them are, not all of them, of course. As you say, it's been incredibly gruelling for them these past 10 months. Justice Goss, when he discharged them on Friday of last week, he did say to them that they would be able to access support if they felt they needed it, having dealt with such harrowing material over the last 10 months. And he also told them that they would never have to face jury duty again. Of course, that is everyone's civic duty, but now that they have dealt with such a long, lengthy trial with so much evidence and so much, it must have been so hard for them to not only hear that evidence but then come to that decision ultimately that they have now been excused from jury duty for the rest of their lives.
And a very telling statement then from Mr. Justice Goss relating to that. Not his part of his function, he said, to look at the reasons why. And I guess this would have occurred to the jurors as well. Why did she do this? And even though we'll get legal closure, if you like, today in terms of the sentencing, those questions will remain.
Absolutely, and I think we got a real sense of that from a lot of the families in their impact statements. Things like what they say, that they will never forgive her and that they will always have hatred towards her. A few of the family members did say that after today they will never think about her again. I believe it was the mother of child A and child B, one of whom was murdered, one of whom was an attempted murder charge. She told the court that she would never think of Lucy Letby again as of today. She said, "You are nothing." And I think that really does sum up exactly what the parents feel about Lucy Letby. Several of them saying they debated whether or not they wanted to give the impact statement because they didn't want to give Lucy Letby the satisfaction of knowing exactly how much pain she has caused. But ultimately, it won out that they did give the victim statements to make sure that Justice Goss knows exactly what Lucy Letby has done to them and their families.
Sophie Reaper, we will rejoin you. Just stay there for the moment. With us in the studio is former Met Police officer Mike Neville. Good to see you again, Mike.
Yes.
Judge is passing sentence. The feed is dropping out for legal reasons. But one thing he said in passing sentence was that Lucy Letby had a detached enthusiasm for resuscitation.
It's just utterly weird, isn't it, when you entrust your children to a nurse in a specialist unit, that they would create more harm. It's completely against the ethos, isn't it, of what a nurse and what anybody in the medical profession is doing. But I think the judge is doing the right thing, Mr. Justice Costa, reading it out as though she was in court. And I just think the public will want to know why this is allowed. Why has she not been put in handcuffs and carried up those stairs and sat in a chair and, if need be, tied to the chair to face justice? I just think it's utter nonsense.
Yeah, Prime Minister's spokesman at Downing Street saying earlier they're looking urgently unfortunately, at this, and there is a bill going through Parliament at the moment that may address this issue, because at the moment, as Mr Justice Goss said, he cannot actually physically make her appear in court. However, there's the additional aspect now that we understand all 4,000 admissions to the hospital are being looked at by police. Clearly, there are questions they think over at least 30 babies as to what might happen. What will the police process be now, hearing this evidence in court, as to what they look at and how they look at it?
Right, so originally, and I've got to congratulate Cheshire Police on their excellent investigation here. Of course, what would have happened, there would have been an initial filter to look at what are the most serious and obvious cases, because if you come to court, you can't present 100 cases of which 90 are questionable, and there's so they've focused on the cases where there's absolutely key evidence. Now, of course, with the guilty finding, they will look at every single case now. They'll be looking in detail, they'll be working with medical experts.
Well, I was going to say, presumably they're going to need a lot of help in terms of trying to interpret what should have happened and what didn't happen.
Absolutely. You'll be, you know, we all joke about doctors' handwriting and doctors' notes. They'll be confronted with all sorts of information, you know, all sorts of terms, details, medication, that they'll need somebody. They'll need a consultant paediatrician to be able to advise them on what all this means, what the specialist care would mean. And then I'm sure, seeing what Cheshire Police have done, I think we can rely on them to do a full examination of every possible case, because there'll be parents out there who've either lost a baby or who's... some of the most awful things is these children, you know, brain damaged, disabled, unable to eat. They will want answers, because if she was there at that time when their child suffered death or some awful thing, they'll want to know. And I have great confidence that Cheshire Police will do an exceptional job on that.
And I think they're looking at, so, as Mark said, 4,000 other babies that were under her care, not just at the Countess of Chester Hospital, but Liverpool Women's Hospital as well, because she started over 10 years ago, didn't she, as a nurse?
Absolutely. So every place she has been, every shift. One of the things is crime pattern analysis. They've been looking at any injury that occurred when she was on duty and going through every shift roster that she was on. That will give an early indication of whether they can say to a parent, look, your child suffered the injury and she was off duty. So you can give some people some kind of assurance nearly straight away.
Now, this is a tricky one, because these are allegations where it's suggested by some of the consultants that they had warned the hospital administrators, the NHS structure, in other words, about what was going on. Some of the doctors say they were ignored, some they're saying they were fobbed off. There are questions as to whether manslaughter charges should be looked at in terms of that sort of structure. Now, that, again, is going to be pretty tricky for the police to investigate that.
Yes, of course, but what they can look at, they can now take statements off all those doctors who say they gave, you know, they made a complaint. They can look at the hospital records to see what people did. And if it can be shown that somebody was so negligent that deaths occurred, then charges of manslaughter may well follow. And I'm sure that's like part 2 of the inquiry. So I was looking at all this, looking at that.
And not just individual charges, but a corporate manslaughter structure as well, where there's systemic failure, if you like.
Absolutely. I think corporate is one thing, but I think what people want to see is heads roll. We need to see who those people were individually, who somebody went to and said, I've got real issues here, and they were either fobbed off or made to make apologies, or they get... Apparently, the hospital actually paid for Lucy Letby's master's degree. So when she was suspended and removed. So there's all these issues. But I personally think, and I think the public want to see, not organisations punished, they want to see those people who made those dreadful decisions, which then resulted in babies being harmed and murdered, brought to book. Not allowed to have massive pensions and fly off to some other well-paid job.
And in terms of a public inquiry, we know that is going to happen, but there are calls for it to be a statutory public inquiry in front of a judge so that witnesses are compelled to give evidence, which they currently wouldn't under the terms of the current one that's planned.
And I think that, again, that's what the public would request here. I mean, all of us, I've got a 1-month-old grandson. You know, you want to be assured, don't you, that the likelihood of this ever happening again are reduced. You're always going to get evil people. No matter what you do in the world, there's always a Dr. Shipman, a Wayne Couzens, a Lucy Letby, people who take advantage of their position to kill. But we've got to make it as hard as possible that this never happens.
It is one of the problems, however, if that inquiry becomes statutory, i.e. led by a judge, and people are called, they have to give evidence on oath, that the police then have to make sure that the evidence they provide is actually gone through in more detail, and that makes the process much longer.
I think that's not a problem. I think it needs to be dealt with officially, particularly if you are looking at manslaughter charges. They have got to be very... When you're charging somebody on neglect, and that neglect is what we've seen, people not managing things properly, not dealing with things properly, I just think we need... That evidence will be as tight as possible. I think the public will understand that will take time. They've seen how long this case...
Yeah, exactly.
They've seen how long. But the facts it was done... It's better long and right rather than short and a mess.
And I suppose what also is very challenging about this is that you're dealing with medicine. And one of the problems that seems to have occurred along the way here is the interpretation of the medical records, the medical language that was used, which meant that certain things were overlooked.
Absolutely, and this is why the police will be relying on medical experts who can give that forensic detail about what this actually means. And the other difficulty, of course, if they face is that a lot of these children may well have died naturally. They're on that.
So it's a neonatal unit.
They're there because they're very premature. Yeah. They're there because they're very, very ill. And this is a real difficulty for the police, because it's proving that action killed that child, when there'll be all sorts of serious things that baby, of challenges that baby just faced from a natural life anyway.
Well, let's reflect, of course, that justice is being done today in terms of these charges. There may well be others to come. But, Mike, for the moment, thank you for that. Let's just update you on what is happening at Manchester Crown Court. We do have the judge, Mr Justice Goss, making his remarks ahead of the sentencing. The prosecution have asked for a whole life tariff for Lucy Letby, which effectively means she spend the rest of her natural life behind bars.
Lucy Letby is not in court for sentencing. She has refused to appear in the dock, but Mr Justice Goss has said he will pass sentence as if she was in the courtroom. He says it is not part of his role to reach conclusions about the underlying reasons for her actions. He says they are known only to you, but the impact of her crimes has been immense. Lifelong harm has been caused after Lucy Letby targeted babies whose lives were cut short almost as soon as they began.
Yeah, the judge said you acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies, and in gross breach of the trust that all citizens place in those who work in the medical and caring professions. He went on to say, the babies you harmed were born prematurely, some were at risk of not surviving, but in each case, you deliberately harmed them, intending to kill them. The judge going on to say, there was premeditation, calculation, and cunning in your actions. He said that Letby had relished being in the intensive care unit, where she took an interest in uncommon complications, even targeting twins and triplets. The judge saying that Letby prided herself on her professionalism, enabling her to start harming children without suspicion.
We are following the sentencing by Mr Justice James Goss at Manchester Crown Court. Correspondent Sophie Reaper is also there, bringing us the very latest. That sentencing is expected to continue into the afternoon. We will bring it here to you live here on GB News. Now, though, let's get the latest headlines.
Thanks very much, Pip. Well, let's just take you straight back to Manchester Crown Court for the sentencing of Lucy Letby.
Over a period of just under 13 months, you killed 7 fragile babies and attempted to kill 6 others. Some of your victims were only a day or a few days old. All were extremely vulnerable, They were in a hospital where others were striving to provide them with dedicated medical and nursing care. By their nature and number, such murders and attempted murders by a neonatal nurse entrusted to care for them are offences of very exceptional seriousness. The damaging impact of your actions on others working at that hospital, including those who numbered you as a friend, betraying their trust and creating upset and suspicion, as well as eroding confidence in clinicians and nurses generally, aggravates their seriousness. This was a cruel, calculated and cynical campaign of child murder involving the smallest and most vulnerable of children, knowing that your actions were causing significant physical suffering and would cause untold mental suffering. You created situations so that collapses or causes of collapses would not be obvious or associated with you. You removed and retained confidential records of events relating to your crimes and checked up on bereaved parents. There was a deep malevolence bordering on sadism in your actions. During the course of this trial, you have coldly denied any responsibility for your wrongdoing and sought to attribute some fault to others. You have no remorse. There are no mitigating factors. In their totality, the offences of murder and attempted murder were of exceptionally high seriousness, and just punishment, according to law, requires a whole life order. Lucy Letby, on each of the 7 offences of murder and the 7 offences of attempted murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Because the seriousness of your offences is exceptionally high, I direct that the early release provisions do not apply. The order of the court, therefore, is a whole life order on each and every offence, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison.
So there you have it, whole life tariff on every of the 7 offences that she had faced and was found guilty of in terms of murder, attempted murder, the judge saying it was a cruel, cynical, calculated campaign of child murder with a deep malevolence bordering on sadism.
He told Lucy Letby, who was not in court for sentencing because she refused to appear in the dock, but he did tell her that you have shown no remorse. There are no mitigating factors. A whole life order is what he has imposed for each and every offence. She will spend the rest of her life in prison, the worst child serial killer in modern British history. Lucy Letby, 33 years old.
Letby was not in court to hear that, but the judge indicating he was addressing his remarks directly to her. Mr Justice Goss telling her she would be provided with copies of his remarks and the personal statements of all those families of her victims that had spoken in court this morning. And, of course, we heard their evidence that they had accused her of playing God effectively. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak saying it was a cowardly act that those who had committed such horrendous crimes did not face their victims. But she will now spend the rest of her life in prison after that whole life order at Manchester Crown Court.
Over the last few hours, the babies' families this morning have been giving their victim impact statement. One mother saying the murder of her son was like something out of a horror story. Other parents told the court that their surviving children, whom Letby attempted to murder, they are now disabled. But Judge Justice Goss, in the last few moments, has given Lucy Letby a whole life sentence for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 more. That whole life sentence means that she will never be released from prison.
The judge said that Letby had relished being in the intensive care unit where she took an interest in uncommon complications, even targeting twins and triplets. The judge saying she'd prided herself on her professionalism, enabling her to start harming children without suspicion. Well, Mike Neville is still with us here in the studio because in addition to this sentencing today, Mike, we now have police saying they'll be looking at all 4,000 babies that went through this unit at the time she was there, with, what, 30 to 40 maybe babies being looked at now with a completely different mindset. They will be thinking the unthinkable as a result of what this judge has said and examining things in a completely different way.
Yes, I agree. I mean, they'll be going through, whereas before there was that main focus on the cases which were really, really strong, where they knew there was absolute evidence that she had committed some atrocious thing. Here they'll be looking at every single case, going through, and I think the first thing is to look at where was she on duty. A key thing, I think, is to assure parents whose child were not attacked by Lucy Letby. That's the case. So their child...
And their minds are put at rest.
Their minds are whether their child is disabled, their child passed away, they've at least got that reassurance it was nature's way and not some wicked act that created...
The other aspect being, and we heard in the evidence, that she had used air. She had used overfeeding of milk as well as insulin. So therefore, it would not have been immediately apparent, effectively hiding what she did, as the judge said.
Absolutely. And these things, of course, are not controlled drugs. Everybody has access to air, to baby milk in those environments. Insulin isn't very well controlled. So these are difficult things to control and so easy for a wicked person to use. And this is what she's done. She's taken advantage of her position, almost seemingly. Will we ever know why? I think people will want to know why she did this, and I'm sure people will be doing everything they're possible, to find out.
Mike, thank you. Sophie Reaper joins us again from Manchester Crown Court. Sophie, Judge Justice Goss, he has given Lucy Letby that whole life sentence. What was the reaction in court?
Well, I don't think there could have been really any other option for Justice Goss in terms of the reaction. I've been outside here listening across it, so I'm not 100%, but I can only imagine that the families, the way they would have reacted was to be a mixture of both relief, but also anger at confirmation that the person who murdered their babies has indeed become this figurehead of the media, and she now faces life in prison. We've just received a statement from Senior Crown Prosecutor Pascal Jones. She says, today's sentence means Letby will never again be able to inflict the suffering she did while working as a neonatal nurse. She has rightly been brought to justice by the courts. My thoughts remain with the families of the victims who have demonstrated enormous strength in the face of extraordinary suffering. I hope that the trial has brought answers which had long eluded them. Now, of course, it has brought answers to them, but as we were talking about earlier, there's one thing they will most likely never get an answer to, and that is why Lucy Letby carried out these heinous crimes. 7 babies murdered, 6 others attempted murders, one of whom she attempted to murder on several occasions. These crimes, Justice Goss, in his sentencing, he described it as a gross breach of trust. He said there was premeditation, calculation and cunning in your actions, and that the impact of your crimes has been immense. Now, of course, we expected Lucy Letby to be awarded a whole life tariff. Realistically, there was no real other option for Justice Goss, given the nature of her crimes. And we now know that Lucy Letby, in modern history Britain, the most prolific serial killer of children, she will die in prison.
Interesting that the judge was explaining that he was addressing the court as if she was there, and then going on to say that she would be provided with copies not just of his remarks, but those statements that we heard earlier today from the families in court.
Of course, I mean, it's been highly controversial that Lucy Letby has been able to refuse to come up to the dock, not only to face the families of those victims, to hear those highly emotional impact statements, but also to avoid looking Justice Goss in the eye as he sentenced her this afternoon. Now, Lucy Letby will spend life in prison, but a lot of people still perhaps may think that's not enough, and that she may be provided with these statements. Of course, it's doubtful that she will actually read them, but it's perhaps almost the next step for the families now is that they can imagine that the best case scenario is that she's been provided these statements and that at some point she will read them and she will understand the hurts that she has caused them.
And those babies, Sophie, it was 5 boys and 2 girls killed by Lucy Letby. 2 of the boys were brothers from triplets, and Lucy Letby was one of the last to hold them. She even dressed him after he died. I mean, what dreadful, dreadful thing for that baby's parents to have to live with.
Just unimaginable pain, I imagine, that those families have experienced. You mentioned the 2 boys who were part of a set of triplets. We heard statements from their parents, both the mother and father. They were pre-recorded statements that were filmed and they were played out in the court because both parents simply felt they would be unable to cope reading them out in person. The father of those 2 boys, child O and child P, he said that at one point he considered taking his own life. He was so distraught that he'd hit rock bottom. He said, Lucy Letby has destroyed our lives. The anger and hatred I have for her will never go away. It has destroyed me as a man and as a father. And I think that really encapsulates the feeling of a lot of those parents who are sitting in court today to hear that sentencing, that she has effectively ruined a lot of their lives, and this is pain that they will now have to deal with for the rest of their lives. And although Lucy Letby will now die in prison, it's really just a consequence at this point. They will still have to suffer with the fact that either Lucy Letby attempted to murder or did in fact murder their babies.
Now, one of the processes, Sophie, that they may find some sort of answers is the inquiry that will now take place with the court case having concluded. And Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, saying he wanted that to happen as quickly as possible. But there are questions now as whether this should be something that is judge-led and statutory, where people are called to give their evidence and they have to give that evidence on oath. That is a longer process. I mean, have you had any indication from the families that you've spoken to as to how they believe this should now be taken forward?
I think at this point, Mark, the families are really just trying to process what they've been hearing, not only over the last 10 months, but specifically the last few weeks, of course, as we've been hearing those verdicts come in dribs and drabs. We've been unable to report them until last Friday, sorry. And at that point, as they've been coming in, of course, each parent and each family have been having to process that. So I think at this point, many of them, they're unable to comment on exactly how they're feeling it and exactly what is to come in the future.
In the last few moments, Sophie, we're hearing that Justice Goss has thanked the jury for their outstanding diligence and acknowledged that the trial will have a very emotional impact, also telling them that there is support available, which underlines how difficult this trial has been for the families, the victims' families, but also the jurors themselves, having to listen to huge swathes of evidence over 9 or 10 months.
Well, I think a great example of their diligence is exactly how long they spent on their deliberations. Of course, there were 22 charges on the indictment, so we always knew that there was going to be a significant period of time they would take to come to their verdicts. But they spent over 100 hours in that deliberating room trying to come to verdicts. We got 3 unanimous verdicts, and then the rest were on the majority direction. There were 6 that were left as hung because they were unable to come to that verdict, but they spent as much time as possible, and it was only when the judge asked if given more time would they be able to come to more verdicts that they then did concede and they were dismissed on those final 6. But they were able to come on 14 of those verdicts, 16 if you include the 2 not guilty verdicts. So I think it's a testament to their diligence over the past 10 months. Of course, the evidence, some of it has been quite graphic, and in other places very harrowing, hearing the evidence given by many members of the families. And it must have been incredibly difficult for those jurors to sit not only and take it all in, but to also not let emotion impact their ultimately.
Sophie, for the moment, thank you for that. But of course, we are expecting some reaction from the Crown Prosecution Service and the police outside the court there, and we'll return to you as we get that. But let's just update you on something else that's coming through, and that is that the senior manager in charge of nursing when Lucy Letby undertook these murders and seriously injured the babies has now been suspended. Alison Kelly and other managers at the Countess of Chester Hospital being accused, of course, in the evidence at court of ignoring warnings. This was from the consultants who gave evidence. She is now nursing director of the Northern Care Alliance, but has since been suspended in light of information that emerged during the trial, that from the National Health Service.
As we've been saying, Lucy Letby refused to attend court today for sentencing. Zara Alina's killer, Jordan McSweeney, you might remember that case. Well, he also refused to attend court. And we can now speak to Zara's aunt, Farah, now. Good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us on GB News. Fully appreciate this must be a very, very difficult day for you as well. What are your thoughts on today's events, primarily the fact that Letby refused to appear in the dock, just like Zara's killer?
I think the important question to ask is why offenders are doing this and why this is becoming a trend. Is it because they're too distressed, or is it because they know they can get away with not attending their sentencing? And I think if it's the latter, then really, something needs to change, doesn't it? Because facing your sentencing is the moment that you're held accountable. It's the moment that you face the judgment. And I think we all agree that it would be ideal for offenders to stand in the dock and face their judgment, both for the victims, for the families, for the person themselves, and for society, because we all know that justice has to be seen to be done in order to feel that it is being done. And for us, certainly, when there was just this empty space in the courtroom, it made our victim impact statements feel pointless. Where were they landing? The judge had already read our victim impact statements. Was it for the press? It was supposed to be for the offender, and for the offender to hear the impact. Whether they listen or not is another story, and maybe they don't listen. But as victims, we need to feel that the process includes us in order for us to be able to feel some sense of retribution.
Yeah, the government says it's looking at this urgently. They have got the victims and prisoners bill going through Parliament at the moment. But you'll know that the counter-argument is that it could be as upsetting or disruptive if you have someone who's physically refusing to come into the dock, or then makes a noise and tries to disrupt the court proceedings, even if they are made physically to attend.
I totally understand that counter-argument. This loophole was created so historically, when felons refused to attend the courtroom, the process was slowed down. So this, and then as the process is slowed down, it's harmful for victims. So it was this loophole was in fact created to serve victims. So I totally understand that, and I think it's important that we don't go back to that. But and neither do we have to force offenders into the courtroom. Who's saying that we have to use brute force? We use the language that they understand, and that is, okay, of course this wouldn't work in the case of Letby, but certainly in our case, if he on his minimum tariff, he got 5 years taken off because he pleaded guilty.
Yes.
When all that had to be said to him was, right, that 5 years goes back on. You don't attend, you behave badly, you get taken out, the 5 years goes back on. It's simple.
Yeah.
But also we can use technology, can't we? And we can streamline.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, because we had Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary, here on GB News on Friday saying, look, the technology is there. You can beam all those witness statements, the judge's remarks to the prison or the police holding cell, and they are physically there and they have to watch and listen.
Yes. And I think, why don't we use that technology? I suppose the questions are here is, what are we doing this for? Why do we want offenders to face the judgment? And there's a couple of answers to that possibly. I don't know for certain, but I've thought about this a lot. This is, of course, the most important factor. When you're a victim of murder, the most important factors are that they get caught, that they get punished, that society is kept safe from them. And that's what's really important. But this is important because victims get a sense of, I'm involved in the justice system. And we have to, as society, members of society, feel like we're being represented. And if we're asked to give victim impact statements, we have to feel like they're going to land somewhere, even if, you know, on deaf ears, that they go somewhere. But why would we be doing this? And I think the key thing here is that actually making offenders attend the courtroom is actually, it's a frightening thing for them to stand in front of a judge and to be judged. And maybe they feel a moment of shame in that. Well, if we don't do that, if we don't make that happen somehow, maybe what we're doing is we're removing a deterrent, an important crime deterrent.
Point. Yeah.
And do you feel, when you look back, that there's still a hole there where you couldn't quite get closure? I mean, I don't think you ever will get closure, will you? But there's a hole there because such an important part was missing when he didn't appear.
There is a hole, but I don't really know for certain, you know, how it all works out, because the hole for us is that, you know, our Zara was murdered, and we'll never know why exactly, you know, what was going on in his mind, why he murdered her in the way that he did. And so there's always a gap. But as human beings, I think whenever somebody offends us, hurts us, damages us, just, you know, destroys one of ours that we love, we want to be able to face that person. As humans, we want to look at that person and say, you did this to me. And I think that that's a natural human need. But maybe it can't be for all of us, you know, and we can only do the best here.
Farah, thank you for taking the time to speak to us here on GB News. And again, we know how difficult it is for you to reflect on these, but thanks very much indeed for that. Mike Neville is still with us in the studio, former Met Police detective. Just looking at what the Crown Prosecution Service is saying, they've issued a statement. Letby will never be able to, again, inflict the suffering she did while working as a neonatal nurse. She has rightly been brought to justice by the court, going on to say, our thoughts remain with the families of the victims who demonstrated enormous strength in the face of extraordinary suffering. And I guess that's the other aspect. It's not just having gone through their shattering experiences initially, they've had to relive it all through this court case as well.
This is the wickedness of Letby pleading not guilty. If she'd have pleaded guilty to these, of course, much of this all this detail would not have to have been relived by the parents and relatives.
Well, they have to prove the case.
Yeah, absolutely, and just show. And I just feel with this business of going into the dock, this never used to happen. I've never known it happen in my police service, and it's all the time. The criminals seem to have more human rights than the victims and the families of victims, and this is where we've seemingly gone wrong as a society, and we hear politicians saying they're urgently looking at it, but nothing seems to be urgent at all, and the public deserve better. They need to see criminals punished, and the criminals need to stand there and hear the judgment upon them.
Has there been sort of a creeping increase in this? Because just like you, I covered, when I was a newspaper reporter, I spent hours in Crown Court covering cases. Never do I remember ever a defendant refusing to appear. It just didn't happen.
I'm with you on that. This is a new thing, and it'll be from some lawyer who tells us all about the human rights of these people, and we forever forget that the victims and the families deserve the human rights, not the person who's murdered 7 babies and done other wicked acts.
But what about the point I was making, Farah, that, you know, the flip side is, if you've got someone kicking and screaming, being dragged into the dock in very, you know, difficult circumstances and lots of families there who are very upset anyway, it's counterproductive in those circumstances.
I don't know. I think you need to see that person there, and that person needs to listen to what the judge is saying. And there is a power in the court with the judge in his robes and the atmosphere there, the Royal Court of Arms, that most people will behave. You know, even the Cray twins stood to attention when they were sentenced. You know, and we live in a different world now, but we give too much leeway to criminals, because again, it was mentioned there that if somebody had time taken off, put on the crime, they would turn up. This is very difficult with Lucy Letby, but I'm sure that 3 prison guards could have put her in handcuffs and carried her up.
Well, I was going to say, is it a case of them being chained, you know, carried up there, gagged if they have to be?
Well, it doesn't take much, really, in the sense that if you say to people, if you give somebody the choice, you don't have to go, I won't go. You say, you're going, and if you, well, I'll carry you up there, or you can walk up there and stand to attention yourself. I think most people have given that choice. The choice is too easy now for criminals to say, I'm not going to go. If they were given that option that, well, you either go yourself or we carry up the stairs, the 2 options are not very good then, and so they'll walk up the stairs. So I just think it's gone too far, and criminals are taken over.
Right. What do you make of this suggestion that Sir Robert Buckland, the former Justice Minister, made here, that, you know, you've got the technology already where you get evidence provided from a prison cell into court, reverse the process so that the prisoner then has to listen and see what's going on in the court itself?
I still think they should stand up in the physical presence, and then the victims can see justice done. The criminal knows that they're being sentenced to this. If they sat downstairs with some TV system on, they could just simply hide in the corner, do it. When you're in the dock, you're in a physical place where you've got to look at them.
I guess the other aspect is that, as we've known today, 8 of the jurors have gone back into court today for the sentencing. That's the other aspect, is that the jury, who have decided whether you are guilty or not the judge, they see the sentencing being carried out.
I think that's right, and it's important, isn't it, in our country, in Western democracies, that we have jury trials, that the community is involved in justice. It's not a hidden thing. The community is involved, and the dedication shown by those jurors to listen to that harrowing evidence. Many of them will have no medical experience whatsoever, apart from going to the doctor, and obviously they want to know the results of this case. Yeah. And she joins, doesn't she, the infamy of being Lucy Letby. It now joins Myra Hindley, Rose West. There's very few women, 3 or 4, being given these whole life orders.
I imagine, I mean, the judge underlined how harrowing this case has been by saying to the jurors, there is support available for you if you need it. That would surely extend to the judge as well.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, I'm sure.
To security staff, anybody who's sat in that.
Anybody who's listened to that awful evidence, because unless you've got policing or medical experience where you're used to dealing with trauma and damaging things, it must be all, you know, if you're a greengrocer on that jury and you're suddenly confronted with this dreadful evidence of children being hurt and harmed and murdered, it must be terrible. But it's good that the judge recognises this and takes that into account.
Yeah, if you're just joining us here in GB News, let's just update you on the fact that Mr Justice Goss has handed down whole life tariffs on all the charges that Letby was found guilty of, both murder and attempted murder. He had told her, addressing her even though she was not in the court itself, there was a malevolence bordering on sadism in your actions. During the course of this trial, you've coldly denied any responsibility for your wrongdoing. You have no remorse. There are no mitigating factors. And he went on to say, in sentencing her to basically life behind bars, you will spend the rest of your life in prison. By the nature and number of such murders and attempted murders by a neonatal nurse entrusted to care for them, it's a case of very exceptional circumstances.
Lucy Letby force-fed babies milk. She forced air into their stomachs and she poisoned them with insulin. And this was over a period of 12 months. Lucy Letby, 33 years old and from Hereford. She has no chance of parole. She has been given that whole life term, and it's been described as a cruel, calculated and cynical campaign of child murder.
Yeah, we are expecting more reaction at Manchester Crown Court from both the police service, who of course will continue now to investigate some 4,000 admissions to the hospital there in Chester, and also the suggestions that there could be some 30 to 40 babies where they have to look in more detail. We'll update you on that and any more news about the inquiry that will follow. But let's get an update now on the news headlines. Tamsin's waiting for us.
Mark, thank you. Here are the headlines at 1:30. The worst child serial killer in modern British history will spend the rest of her life in prison. Within the last half an hour, Lucy Letby was given a whole life term at Manchester Crown Court. The 33-year-old was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 16. Letby refused to attend court for sentencing. Handing down the sentence, Mr Justice Goss said there was premeditation, calculation and cunning in her actions.
You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies, and in gross breach of the trust that all citizens place in those who work in the medical and caring professions.
Impact statements from parents were heard by the court this morning. The mother of one baby murdered by Lucy Letby says her experience in hospital was like something out of a horror story. Another said she was haunted by vivid images and that Letby had destroyed her life after 2 of her triplets were killed. The Prime Minister says the inquiry into Letby's crimes should happen as quickly as possible.
Well, I think the important thing for the inquiry to do is make sure that families get the answers that they need, that it is possible for us to learn the lessons from what happened, everything conducted transparently and to happen as quickly as possible. Those are the objectives that we want for the inquiry, and we'll make sure that it's set up to deliver on those aims.
Well, you can get more on this story by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.276 and €1.1695. The price of gold is £1,485 and 37 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,293 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
So just shut up.
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, we're being greeted by superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
You're watching the live desk on GB News. Britain's most prolific child killer, Lucy Letby, will spend the rest of her life in prison as the 33-year-old former nurse was handed a whole life tariff at Manchester Crown Court a short time ago.
Well, Mr Justice Goss said that Letby had showed premeditation, calculation and cunning in her actions. When sentencing her, the parents of one of her victims being quoted as saying, "Lucy Letby destroyed our lives."
Well, some political reaction now, and the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called for the government to change the law on offenders not attending sentencing hearings.
We need to change the law. I hope the government will do it because I think it can be done very quickly. If they don't, we will force an amendment to appropriate legislation. But actually, my position is to invite the government to get on with it, to offer Labour support, so this could go through very, very quickly. This isn't the first case. The government has been dragging its heels on this. Get on with it for the sake of these victims and, of course, the other cases that went before it.
Well, in terms of the government, the Justice Secretary Alex Chalk said this after the verdict. Lucy Letby, he said, is not just a murderer but a coward whose failure to face the victims' families, refusing to hear their impact statements and society's condemnation is the final insult. He went on to say, we're looking to change the law so offenders can be compelled to attend sentencing hearings. Well, let's get more now with our political editor, Chris Hope, who can join us at Westminster. And Chris, certainly there is I think the Victims and Prisoners Bill, it's called, that's going through Parliament at the moment. Could that be the vehicle for this?
Well, Number 10 says today that can't be a vehicle for this. So Keir Starmer there saying we'll support the government, or even if they won't do it, we'll do it for you. And he's a former Director of Public Prosecutions, knows all about prosecuting and the frustrations. But that legislation you mentioned there, Mark, cannot be used for this. So therefore, we're waiting on new legislation to be produced for the King's speech when the government sets out its plans for the next year with new laws. That should be around November time. And then there'll be quite a rush on to get that through in double quick time before Parliament breaks up for the general election next year. But with Labour support, it's not going to be very controversial. It should get through. The current rules are that if you refuse to turn up for sentencing, you can get 2 years added to your sentence for contempt of court. But in the most serious cases, of which Lucy Letby is the most serious case, that 2 more years makes no difference. It's a whole life tariff. So they're looking at other ways of doing it. One idea, Robert Buckland on GB News last week saying how the verdict could be piped into the cells, as you were saying earlier, Mark. That's one idea. Of course, how do you compel someone to come along?
Yeah.
And Chris, Keir Starmer is saying the government is dragging its heels over this. I mean, is there not any way that this law can be rushed through more quickly?
He's got a point, Keir Starmer. Back in February, Dominic Raab, remember him? He was the Justice Secretary. He said then that the government would move ahead rapidly to try and force criminals to come and hear their sentence, and also crucially hear for the victims, the victim impact statements. Number 10 today said, well, yes, it's important, but we have conflicting priorities, and we have to do other things too in government, not just one thing. So, yes, they are dragging their heels. Keir Starmer's right on that, and the hope is that the anger and the fury over Letby's crimes will mean that the political will get behind this, and we'll see something in November, and then maybe on the statute by, this time next year.
Now, Sir Keir Starmer's also said that this inquiry into what happened should be on a statutory footing. This is the other argument that seems to be going on, with certainly Rishi Sunak saying he wanted to see the process as quickly as possible. And, of course, statutory hearings aren't quick, are they?
That's right, the balance is speed against doing a thorough inquiry. Now, the government was informed by representatives of the victims' family last week that they were going to go as fast as they can, and they thought then that the non-statutory inquiry would work. But in fact, I think the government today is saying, or Rishi Sunak is saying, that they are leaning towards whatever works for you, we'll do it. The problem is, though, as you say, Mark, if you get lawyers involved, lawyers for all the trust, lawyers for all the managers and executives, lawyers for the families, it soon racks up cost and time. And really, frankly, there needs to be lessons learned quickly so another Letby case can't happen again.
Christopher, for the moment, thank you for that. We'll see, of course, what emerges in terms of both the pressing need to get people in the dock and then, of course, the inquiry as well. But let's now return to Manchester Crown Court. And Sophie Reaper is there, of course, our North West of England reporter who's been following this from the very beginning. Sophie, just give us an idea of the atmosphere there, because, of course, we're getting these fairly dry comments from the judge, but indicating, the pain that the families have gone through. Have we had any indication as to how they're coping with this day, the day of reckoning, if you like?
Well, although I wasn't present in court for the sentencing because I've been out here reacting, I spoke with a colleague moments ago and asked him what the reaction was like when Justice got past that sentence of a whole life tariff, and he told me that there was absolute silence in the courtroom, but some of the family members were crying. So I think that's highly indicative of exactly what they are feeling. They're probably too emotional to react in any other way than to allow a few tears to fall. They're probably still in a bit of shock, still coming to terms with the fact that the woman who murdered their children or attempted to murder their children will now spend the rest of her life in prison.
Today, Lucy Letby's parents, they were not in court either for the sentencing, and yet they had been supporting their daughter throughout this trial, hadn't they?
Yes, they have been present at court every single day since October. They've always been a presence there for their daughter. However, once Lucy stopped appearing in the dock, we then noticed that her parents stopped appearing in court. So one would imagine that they were coming to show their support for their daughter, and when they realised that she was no longer going to be there to see their support, that they instead would quietly take a step back and instead perhaps watch the news from home about exactly what the sentence would be.
And talking about this this personal reaction, we've heard from Detective Chief Inspector Nicola Evans, who's been again with this case from the beginning, indicating that the impact statements read out in court today, hearing their own experience, she said in their own words, has been truly heartbreaking. And let's not forget that those pursuing this case have had to go through all these details, and there's more work to do, if you like, with what 4,000 admissions to the hospital they now have to look at.
Absolutely, and that statement from Nicola, I can confirm, is sincere, because when those impact statements were being read out, we could see her in court, and she was in fact crying as a reaction to those impact statements. So it is a sincere statement from Detective Chief Inspector Nicola Evans. I have got the statement here, so I'll read just a little bit out for our viewers at home. She says, "Today, Lucy Letby has been handed a whole life order. The sentence reflects the true scale and gravity of her horrific crimes and ensures that a calculated and dangerous individual is behind bars for a very long time. Nothing will bring back the babies who died or take away the pain and suffering experienced by all of the families over the years. But I hope that the significant sentence will bring some comfort at this dark time." Now, I've worked with Nicola Evans over the course of this case. She's been a key figure for the media to liaise with over this investigation. She's been right at the heart of it. We interviewed her ahead of those verdicts coming in, and she told us what Lucy Letby was like when she'd spoken to her. And I think the word that sticks in my mind that Nicola used was beige. And when we asked her about that, the reason for that, she said, was because she just seems like a normal, average nurse. She wasn't extraordinary in any particular way. She wasn't particularly memorable. She was just beige. And I think that really does describe Lucy Letby quite well. She was able to carry out these heinous crimes under the cover of being the average nurse, the quiet one who didn't really speak that much. And that's why it took so long for anyone to realise exactly what was going on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester.
When Lucy Letby did appear in court and was in the witness box, what were your observations of her, Sophie? One of the things I've kept reading is that actually she's very softly spoken, she's very emotionless. What did you think when you saw her?
Well, on the very few occasions we actually heard her speak until she began her evidence, she was very softly spoken. But as she sat in the dock, she was always remarkably cool, calm and collected. She never really showed much emotion on her face. She always seemed to take everything in her stride. There were a few instances where you did see a flicker of emotion, but until she began to give her own evidence, there wasn't really much. However, when she did take the stand, that's when we really did start to see the facade slipping. On a few separate occasions, there were several instances where there was heavy tears, and there was even one day where we had to stop court altogether because she simply said she just couldn't take it anymore and that she needed a break. So I think as we got on with those 10 months, then we did start to see the reactions coming. But the majority of the time, she was quite collected, I would say. Then, of course, when we started to hear those verdicts, the first few that she was indeed present for in the dock, we heard on the 8th of August the first two guilty verdicts. For those two verdicts, she was very emotional. We could hear her sobbing as she was led away from the dock. Then on the next set of verdicts, when we heard those first guilty of murder verdicts, then she became her old self. Then she remained completely emotionless, stony-faced, not reacting in any way. And after that, we didn't see her again. That was the last time we saw her in the dock. Perhaps because she at that point had accepted her fate. She knew she'd been found guilty at that stage of 4 murders, and she must have realised that realistically she was looking at life in prison at that point. So her emotions have been up and down.
I was going to say that the other interesting phrase that Nicola Evans, the Detective Chief Inspector, used about the interview process that they went through, she said it was surreal in terms of the answers that they were getting and the way that it was going. And, you know, she's a very experienced detective. This may indicate the difficulty in going forward to investigate these further cases that they're looking at now at the hospital.
Well, given what we've heard today, that sentence of a whole life tariff, I can't imagine that Lucy Letby will be particularly willing to comply with any further questioning from Cheshire Constabulary. So, as you say, that perhaps does put them on the back foot in terms of this new inquiry, in terms of any further investigations that will be going on. They will be instead relying on evidence from perhaps other people that she worked with at the time.
Sophie Reaper, thank you for your observations. I know it's been a very gruelling time for you as well, so thank you for your brilliant, brilliant reporting from Manchester Crown Court, where Lucy Letby has been sentenced to a whole life term. Former Met Police Detective Mike Neville is with us. Sir Keir Starmer commenting, Mike, saying that the inquiry into Lucy Letby's crimes should be absolutely put on a statutory footing, and that's partly because it's what the victim's family want. Now, that has to be a consideration, doesn't it?
I think so, yes. You should carefully listen to what the victims' families and all the other potential victims' families as well. And I just think this is so grave, this incident, that we have to have the inquiry at the highest level, led by a judge, so evidence is on oath, so they can see. And as indicated before, slow and correct is much better than fast and getting it wrong and having to revisit things.
And I guess the parallel would be where we've been discussing the fact that Letby's not been in the dock to hear the sentencing. The statutory basis for the inquiry means people have to be called to the... If you're called, you have to turn up. There's no get-out clause.
There's no get-out clause at all. You have to turn up, you have to give your evidence, and that evidence is on oath, so if you tell lies, you will face criminal proceedings for perjury. So I just think it's the right way to go. This is dreadful. We've heard that there may be many, many other cases. People have got to be assured. You know, when we had the case of Wayne Couzens, the police officer who killed one person, there was calls for disbandment of the Metropolitan Police and the like. Here we have a nurse who's killed at least 7 babies, and added on to the cases of Beverly Alice and Shipman, Harold Shipman as well. These are awful things that people should go into a hospital and be absolutely trusting they're going to get the best treatment.
Yeah, you praise Cheshire Police for what they've done so far, but one wonders now whether they're going to need some outside help, bearing in mind the scale of what they've got in front of them, looking back at these other cases.
Yeah, absolutely, because Cheshire Constabulary is a very small force. You know, it's surrounded by Manchester and Merseyside Police, and they'll have, of course, they've got senior detectives involved in this case, and they'll have every day, they'll have murders, there'll be burglaries, robberies, rapes that have to be dealt with, and I think it's only right that other forces will come in and assist, and there are procedures for that to happen under mutual aid. Other forces will supply detectives, rather like the Hillsborough inquiry had detectives from several different forces investigating. So I think that would be right, but the key thing is as well, of course, is the medical experts who will be absolutely intrinsically part of that inquiry.
And do some police officers get special training on that? Obviously they have forensic officers, for instance, that know what to look for in terms of chemicals and all those sorts of things.
No, all the things like that. There's no point training police officers to do it. Leave the police officers are there to analyse the data, investigate, present all the evidence. Why do that when you can bring in people who've got absolute forensic experts, paediatricians, people who are experts in medication, in pharmacy, who would know a pathologist, who can absolutely give the police officer, the senior investigating officer, all this information. The job of the senior investigating officer and the team is to put all that together. Sift it and put all the bits together.
And for the families, the babies' families, their nightmare goes on. There's been some closure today, but their nightmare goes on. Some of them are caring for very ill children that Lucy Letby tried to murder unsuccessfully, thank goodness. What ongoing support is there for these families? That will continue, surely. It's not a case of what's happened today, that's it now, she's been sentenced.
Absolutely. So the family liaison officers in the police, they're highly trained officers who've got a real an ability to communicate, to look after people. They won't just be simply withdrawn. They'll maintain a relationship with the families as well. But as you say, it's an absolute nightmare. I remember my own grandparents had lost a child, and it never was forgotten. And how do you ever forget if it's lost in such evil circumstances? It's just dreadful, and my prayers are with the families of those who died and those who have been very seriously injured and disabled.
Yeah, and let's also perhaps reflect on the police directly involved as well. Sophie indicating, of course, that Detective Chief Inspector Nicola Evans, she had tears in her eyes in that court hearing. You know, they're human beings.
Everybody,
police officers,
police officers are human beings.
Yeah. Well, let's just reflect on those thoughts from Nicola Evans that we had in a statement saying the sentence reflecting the true scale and gravity of Lucy Letby's horrific crimes and ensures that a calculated and dangerous individual is behind bars for a very long time. Nothing will bring back the babies who died or take away the pain and suffering experienced by all the families, but I hope that the significant sentence will bring some comfort at this dark time.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. For the rest of Monday, pretty warm across the south, with many places seeing sunny spells. There are a few showers around, and it's more than just a few showers in the far northwest. This low pressure system bringing pretty wet and windy conditions across the Western Isles and increasingly now across the Highlands as well. So staying wet here. We'll see a few showers this evening over Wales, perhaps over northern England for a time. So some heavy bursts of rain before that clears away. Turning damp across most of Scotland and Northern Ireland through the night, but across the south it generally stays dry. Some mist and fog is possible. Staying pretty warm as well across the whole of the UK. Actually, temperatures holding up in the mid-teens in most urban areas. So quite a mild start to Tuesday, a sunny start over the Midlands and eastern England, and another fine day generally across the south once we've lost any morning mist and fog. Across northern England, Wales, southern Scotland, more cloud than today, and there will be a few more showers around as well. The showers easing off across Scotland though, so northwestern areas turning a little drier. A cooler feel across the north, but again in the south, in the sunshine, temperatures could easily get into the mid-20s. 26, 27 is possible. By Wednesday, again, quite a lot of cloud at times, but generally, again, most places looking fine and sunny. Increasing chance of a few showers over the southwest and West Wales. And again, across western parts of Scotland, there will be some showers. And generally a bit cooler, but again, in the sunshine in the southeast, 27 is possible.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know,
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, the big read my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. This is the live desk here on GB News. Coming up this Monday lunchtime.
A judge tells Lucy Letby she will die in prison, sentencing her to a whole life tariff for the murder of babies in her care. He said she was guilty of a cruel, calculated campaign of child murder.
The sentencing comes after victim statements were read out to the court. The words of one mother: "You thought it was your right to play God with our children's lives."
Letby was not in the dock for the hearing. Her refusal to attend called cowardly by the Prime Minister. But the Justice Secretary says a review of the law is now underway. Labour says the government is dragging its heels over the issue.
During the next hour, we'll bring you all the latest reaction from Manchester Crown Court and Westminster. All of that very shortly. First, your headlines with Tamsin.
Pip, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 2. The most prolific child serial killer in modern British history will spend the rest of her life in prison. Lucy Letby has been given a whole life term at Manchester Crown Court. The 33-year-old was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 16. Letby refused to attend court for sentencing. Handing down the sentence, Mr Justice Goss said there was premeditation, calculation and cunning in her actions.
You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies, and in gross breach of the trust that all citizens place in those who work in the medical and caring professions.
Impact statements from parents were heard by the court this morning. The mother of one baby murdered by Lucy Letby says her experience in hospital was like something out of a horror story. Another said she was haunted by vivid images and that Letby had destroyed her life after 2 of her triplets were killed. And a further mother of 2 of Letby's victims, one of whom survived, called her absence in court a final act of wickedness from a coward. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says that if the government doesn't change the law, they'll face an amendment.
Because I think it can be done very quickly. If they don't, we will force an amendment to appropriate legislation. But actually, my position is to invite the government to get on with it, to offer Labour support, so this could go through very, very quickly. This isn't the first case. The government has been dragging its heels on this. Get on with it for the sake of these victims and, of course, the other cases that went before it.
The Prime Minister has defended the non-statutory inquiry announced by the government into Letby's crimes, amid calls for it to be put on a statutory footing with the power to compel witnesses to appear before it.
Well, I think the important thing for the inquiry to do is make sure that families get the answers that they need, that it is possible for us to learn the lessons from what happened, everything conducted transparently and to happen as quickly as possible. Those are the objectives that we want for the inquiry, and we'll make sure that it's set up to deliver on those aims.
Well, to other news now, some breaking news. 700 migrants have crossed the English Channel so far today as the Border Force begins a week of so-called red days. The force's internal red alert system is predicting high numbers of arrivals. After poor weather in the Channel in recent weeks, forecasters are now expecting close to ideal conditions. GB News reported that 13 small boats had made it to the UK waters by midday today, with at least 700 migrants transferred to several Border Force vessels and lifeboats. A 50-year-old man will appear in court later following the major police data breach in Northern Ireland. He's been charged with possessing documents likely to be useful to terrorists. It's after the details of 10,000 officers and staff were published online by mistake. The leak contains the surname and initial of every employee, their rank, where they're based and the unit they work in. Police believe the information is now in the hands of dissident Republicans. The government is calling on housing associations, social landlords and developers to review tenancy contracts to help childminders work from home. Many living in rented accommodation are prevented from using their homes for business purposes. The Department for Education says too often prospective childminders are having the door slammed in their face. The government is also bringing in measures to encourage more people to care for school-aged children, including a £1,200 start-up grant. From today, Londoners are eligible for a cash grant of up to £2,000 for cars that don't comply with ULEZ policies. The Mayor of London's scrappage scheme will cost around £110 million. It begins today ahead of the expanded ultra-low emission zone, which will cover all London boroughs from the 29th of August. But the policy faces opposition in other parts of government, with the council leader in Hertfordshire refusing to erect signs warning drivers of the new low-emission zone. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Tamsin, thank you. Lucy Letby will spend the rest of her life in jail for her cruel, calculated and cynical campaign of murder and attempted murder of babies at the hospital where she worked. The most prolific child serial killer in modern British history was told by Judge Mr Justice Goss that there was a malevolence bordering on sadism in your actions, for which you have no remorse.
Well, the 33-year-old convicted by a jury of murdering 7 babies and trying to kill 6 more while she was working in the Countess of Chester Hospital's neonatal unit between 2015 and 2016. Well, the judge handed down the whole life order at Manchester Crown Court, making her only the 4th woman in UK history to be told she'll never be released from prison. Let's get more now with our GB News North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper, who's been following this case from the beginning there at Manchester Crown Court with many other reporters. And I guess everyone's still trying to work out why she did this. Clearly, the judge indicated he could not answer that. Now there are the questions about the inquiry, whether that will be statutory or not, to find out what the health service, the hospital administrators knew or didn't know about what was going on.
Well, I think in terms of the why of it all, I think that is the one gaping hole across this whole court case, and I think it's something that we realistically will never have an answer to. The motive behind this was never discussed across the entirety of the 10 months of this court case, and Lucy Letby herself has always maintained her innocence. She pled not guilty to all 22 charges on the indictment. Over the past few sessions in court, she's refused to appear in the dock, including today for the sentencing. She refused to appear there to face the families of her victims and to face Justice Goss as he read out that sentence, subjecting her to a whole life order, meaning she will now spend the rest of her life in prison.
And just to explain to people that there are legal restrictions on identifying the families and the babies, hence we talk about child A, child B and so on, but the raw emotion of the impact statements that were read out in court, the judge wanted those, or was indicating those will be delivered to Letby in her cell.
Absolutely. I think emotions have been high throughout the entirety of this court case, as you would expect. But I think today it reached a new level. Hearing from those family members, mothers and fathers who either lost children or whose child was affected, and that's therefore affected their relationship with them or their ability to trust people, never mind the nurses in that particular profession. It has tainted them. One father to two of the boys who were murdered said about how much hatred he has for Lucy Letby and the fact that that will never dissipate, even though, of course, she has now been given that whole life tariff. Those families will always have to suffer with the fact that either their baby was taken away or that they almost were nearly taken away due to Lucy Letby's actions.
And that's another aspect of this, Sophie, is that as well as those babies who were murdered, we heard from the families about the babies that survived, but they too have a life sentence, if you like, in terms of the condition. I think one's lost their sight, they have to be fed by a tube, and the family's having to cope with that now.
Absolutely. That's child G that you're referring to there, Mark. We heard from her father. She has been left severely disabled by Lucy Letby's actions. And one line that particularly stuck with me was that after child G almost died, he'd prayed to God for her and he said, God saved her, but the devil found her, obviously referring there to Lucy Letby. And I think that's a really poignant line. It's something that affects not only that particular family, but all the families who have... Lucy Letby has now been found guilty of attacking their baby.
And we must remind ourselves as well, Sophie, that these babies were premature, they were incredibly vulnerable, they could fit into the palm of your hand. They still had a chance of survival, though, until Lucy Letby was looking after them.
Absolutely. Of course, when a child is on a neonatal unit, that does often mean there is some kind of potential life-threatening issue. As you say, many of them premature or with some kind of condition, but often they were being treated. And a repeated theme that we've heard throughout this trial is my baby was improving, or they were stable, and then Lucy Letby became involved, and that's when they either began to crash or they did crash and they were unable to be revived.
Now, have we got any indication as to whether the Crown Prosecution Service and the police will be giving any reaction outside the court? I know we've had this statement from Nicola Evans, the Detective Chief Inspector, because clearly they still have to keep the families, if you like, in terms of the legal process, they have to be not identified in any way.
We don't believe there's going to be any kind of further statement here today outside Manchester Crown Court. Of course, they did react on Friday after we were able to report on those verdicts and the jury was discharged. They did all react then, and we have heard, as you say, from Nicola Evans, but also from Pascal from the Crown Prosecution Service. She's reacted this morning, giving us a statement in which she said, today's sentence means Letby will never again be able to inflict the suffering she did while working as a neonatal nurse. She has rightly been brought to justice by the courts, and that's a key word there, justice. I think when we heard the joint statement from the families on Friday, they did say that now they believe justice has been served, but that there is still some way to go.
Sophie, thank you very much for updating us there at Manchester Crown Court after the sentencing and that whole life tariff. Thank you.
Former Police and Crime Commissioner Martin Underhill can join us now. Good afternoon to you, Martin. The Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, has branded Lucy Letby refusing to appear in the dock for her sentencing as an insult to the families of her victims. Would you like to see a change in the law as a matter of urgency?
Good afternoon. Yes, I would. And the Justice Secretary's comments are absolutely right. I think most viewers would agree. I'm a bit concerned to hear that already they're saying that the law can't be changed until this time next year. Labour aren't opposing this change in the law. Everybody's supporting it. So I'm really surprised that what they call a negative statutory instrument can't be put through to amend the current bill going through Parliament. But in the last half an hour, several commentators are saying we have to wait for the King's speech and law to take a year, which just seems ridiculous, and actually says a lot about our parliamentary system when every politician in the country, every member of the country, wants to see this law change quickly. We're being told it can't happen. And don't forget, in February this year, the Justice Minister said he would be looking to change the law. This isn't the first time this has happened. So the government has left us 6 months in the lurch, and now they're saying it could be another year before the law is changed. And actually, all of us, everybody watching this programme, would support a change in the law. So I think it's also important.
Yeah, do you therefore agree with Sir Keir Starmer's assessment this lunchtime that the government's been dragging its feet on this then?
Well, it has, to be honest. They announced in February, after another high-profile case, identical to Letby, in a sense that the defendant refused to go to court, that the government would seek a change in the law very quickly. I think it's also useful to remember that the law does actually exist now. Prison officers are allowed to use reasonable force to make someone attend court. The prison service chose not to. So the only way this law can work is the same as fingerprinting. If someone refuses to be fingerprinted or to have their DNA taken, the police can use force to take it. And I can only see a similar law to that being brought in to mean that more than reasonable force can be used so that the victims get their justice in court.
What about the point, and I have asked others this morning, that it could be even more disruptive if you've got someone being dragged, kicking and screaming into the dock, where you've got families who've gone through all sorts of trauma already, having to see those scenes played out in court?
No, I agree. I'm not suggesting they be dragged into the court. What I would suggest is that they are restrained in a small room and made to watch the TV feed, which means that the victims can watch the defendant can watch the court case without, as you say, the distressing scenes of insults or violence being displayed at a time when the families have just read their victim statements and are in a traumatised state.
So this would be Sir Robert Buckland's point, that the technology would be used and you'd have video links between the court and some kind of holding cell, for instance.
Absolutely. That is the common sense way to do it. An amendment to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act with a statutory instrument could be achieved very quickly. The Police and Criminal Evidence Act dictates what the police do when people are in custody, or the law that's going through Parliament now could be changed. To hear that the government are saying we'd need a new law to come in the King's speech is depressing and, frankly, unacceptable.
Is it something that you've known an increase in, though, in recent years? We were saying earlier that it didn't seem to ever happen. A defendant was just expected to appear in the dock, and now they're refusing. Is that because too many lawyers have got involved?
It is a new thing, and I think part of it is because we are now televising court cases. 20 years ago, when I was running murder inquiries, you never saw anybody refuse to be sentenced. But now, of course, as you've seen today with Justice Goss, he was live on TV showing the sentence. So I think that bringing this into the TV, into the courtroom, is why people are now stopping attending their own sentencing. But as you already said in your earlier coverage, you can't add a penalty to Letby to make her get there. The only way this can be done is by using force, which is why I think Robert Buckland's suggestion is a good one. Have an ante-room in a prison where the defendant has to listen to the judge, and the defendant is seen by the members of the jury, not the members of the jury, by the families who want to see justice done. OK,
former Police and Crime Commissioner Martin Underhill, thank you.
Let's now speak to former Senior Investigating Officer at the Met, Simon Harding, who can join us. Simon, thank you very much indeed for your time. What happens next? Because we are hearing from Cheshire Police that they've got, 4,000 admissions to this neonatal unit they're going to be looking at. 30 or more babies, maybe, they've got to look at in more detail. That's quite a caseload to take on.
It is a caseload, but I don't think they'll shy away from that at all. I mean, firstly, you've got the 6 or so cases where they were unable to find a decision, the jury, so like a hung jury, and the decision there has to be in the next month, 28 days, that whether or not they retry those with a new jury. That may then start to coincide with other cases that come to the forefront. Obviously, 4,000 cases, as you say, is a huge amount of work. But you'd be proud to do it. It's what police officers are there for. DCI Evans and her team have done a fantastic job, and I don't think they'll shy away from carrying on with it, irrespective of the fact that she has a whole life order.
And how do they do that? Because they, as we've said earlier, got to start thinking the unthinkable. I mean, this behaviour beyond, the norms that we accept. So they're going to have to sort of put their minds in a very dark place.
Yeah, it's not an easy job to do it. Obviously, we know that. Investigated murders for many years, and but you take yourself outside that, because the most important people here are the families. And just because there are thousands more to look at, if there is one case within that which is worth that trial for that family to get to court to find that person that killed their child, it's worth every hour you put into it.
And how will they approach Lucy Letby now then, in terms of interviewing her again, trying to get information of her and hoping that she might crack?
Yeah, well, that's something which is available to them in certain circumstances, to go and speak to her if she's willing. Obviously, if she's not, then she just won't meet any officers that do it. But then you still have this other judicial process. I mean, whether she helps with that now, based on what she's been given, but then she hasn't admitted anything. Obviously, we know there's no remorse. So will she help officers do that? Well, you hope so in your heart of hearts, to give some sort of help to those families that are still waiting for information, and those that haven't had what they want so far. So, it's one of those strands of the investigation that DCI Evans and the superintendent above her will be looking at. But at the moment, they'll still be working tirelessly to go through those other cases.
Yeah, and what about the complicating factor now that we may get this statutory inquiry, which will be a judge being involved, questions about what the health authority, the NHS and the hospital administrators were doing or not doing, with suggestions that there may even have to be consideration of manslaughter being looked at in some circumstances?
Yeah, I've seen that. I mean, the corporate manslaughter is complicated. It's not the greatest law that we have in this country. It's very difficult to prove that, but and that would be essentially another investigation. You'd have health and safety involved in that. You'd have police officers at the right time coming into that as well. So, yeah, that will be a potentially even bigger to look at. But then after all these inquiries, such like in the policing side of it, the Cousins inquiry and other people like that, there is always going to be a fallout to that, because you need to understand, what's gone wrong. Can this be improved? But let's not just then turn around and say we will learn from this. Let's do something about it.
Yeah, as
ever.
So
much work still to be done. Former senior investigating officer at the Met Police, Simon Harding, thank you for your thoughts today. When we come back, the political reaction to Lucy Letby's sentencing and her decision to stay away from the court.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. For the rest of Monday, pretty warm across the south, with many places seeing sunny spells. There are a few showers around, and it's more than just a few showers in the far northwest. This low pressure system bringing pretty wet and windy conditions across the Western Isles and increasingly now across the Highlands as well. So staying wet here. We'll see a few showers this evening over Wales, perhaps over northern England for a time. So some heavy bursts of rain before that clears away. Turning damp across most of Scotland and Northern Ireland through the night, but across the south it generally stays dry. Some mist and fog is possible. Staying pretty warm as well across the whole of the UK. Actually, temperatures holding up in the mid-teens in most urban areas. So quite a mild start to Tuesday, a sunny start over the Midlands and eastern England, and another fine day generally across the south once we've lost any morning mist and fog. Across northern England, Wales, southern Scotland, more cloud than today, and there will be a few more showers around as well. The showers easing off across Scotland though, so northwestern areas turning a little drier. A cooler feel across the north, but again in the south, in the sunshine, temperatures could easily get into the mid-20s. 26, 27 is possible. By Wednesday, again, quite a lot of cloud at times, but generally, again, most places looking fine and sunny. Increasing chance of a few showers over the southwest and West Wales. And again, across western parts of Scotland, there will be some showers. And generally a bit cooler, but again, in the sunshine in the southeast, 27 is possible.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk on GB News, bringing you some political reaction now into the sentencing of Lucy Letby. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has called for the government to change the law on offenders not attending sentencing hearings, and he wants that law changed quickly, saying the government is dragging its heels.
We need to change the law. I hope the government will do it, because I think it can be done very quickly. If they don't, we will force an amendment to appropriate legislation. But actually, my position is to invite the government to get on with it, to offer Labour support, so this could go through very, very quickly. This isn't the first case. The government has been dragging its heels on this. Get on with it for the sake of these victims and, of course, the other cases that went before it.
Well, in terms of the government's position, this is what the Justice Secretary Alex Chalk had to say following the verdict. He said Lucy Letby is not just a murderer but a coward whose failure to face the victims' families, refusing to hear the impact statements and society's condemnation, is the final insult. He went on to say, we're looking to change the law so offenders can be compelled to attend sentencing hearings.
Well, with us now is GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope. Good afternoon to you, Christopher. Alex Chalk is saying that the government does want to change the law, but the question seems to be is how quickly they're going to change it, because it doesn't seem like it's going to happen very fast.
They've been talking about this for a while, haven't they? Since February, when Dominic Raab, remember him, he was Justice Secretary at the time, he said there would be changes to the law. Well, we now have to wait till the King's Speech when the government sets out its plans for new laws over the next 12 months, and that's due out in November. There is a bill going through Parliament right now. It's called the Victims and Prisoners Bill, but that can't be amended, we're told. So Keir Starmer's very generous offer to the government there to support an amendment can't go through, according to the government, as things stand, but it looks like there is cross-party support, which should mean this kind of thing should get through in double quick time, and time is of the essence. You can't have the situation as we had today when Lucy Letby can thumb her nose at the entire justice system, not hear the sentencing and not hear those heart-rending victims' impact statements that are read out in court. It's important she hears that, she sees that, that's justice being seen to be done. She understands the impact of her crimes, and if she's not looking at the website, GB News website, or the newspapers tomorrow morning, how will she ever hear that? It's very important that they are made to hear this.
Yeah, a lot of people are asking, well, why can't you just use contempt of court, which is existing legislation? But I suppose that still doesn't have the power to physically get people into the court.
Yeah, and in the case of the most serious cases, Mark, it wouldn't have much bearing, would it? Because, of course, Lucy Letby's had a whole life tariff imposed. The maximum you can get under contempt of court for this is 2 years extra to your sentence. That makes no difference to somebody who should never be released, and therefore, what's the point? The idea of Robert Buckland on GB News at the end of last week piping in the verdict into a cell, that's kind of OK, but not what victims want to see. They want to see the person who did it in court being made to listen. I've been reliably informed, Mark, that human rights concerns are not an issue here, according to the government. They say that even in France you can be compelled to a degree. So the issue of the European Convention of Human Rights does not apply. So that should give the government a free hand to get on with it. They're asked in lobby this morning, the lobby briefing we have here in Parliament with the PM spokesman. He just said simply, and there is some sympathy here, there's lots of competing demands on government time. They recognise now it's an important issue. They will prioritise it, but that's why they've been delay so far.
Right, and number 10 also having its say on this debate going on as to what the inquiry should be doing in terms of looking into the Letby case, whether it should be statutory, i.e. led by a judge with people having to give evidence on oath.
Yeah, to be fair to the government or the senior figures in DHSC, the Department of Health and Social Care, they were led to believe by the families last week that a non-statutory inquiry was acceptable. That's changed over the weekend, and we heard Rishi Sunak, didn't we, speaking earlier in Richmond in Yorkshire, saying that all his priority is to do the best by the victims, the families' victims, and also trying to get the thing done as quickly as possible. The problem with a statutory inquiry is it can get tied up in legal argument for a long time. We're seeing that right now with the COVID inquiry, huge cost to the taxpayer. Everyone gets a lawyer, the victims, I mean, and it can go on for quite a while. So they're trying to get instant view of what happened here. The view is there has been a court case. That's all been, almost the facts are settled from the court case. What are the lessons to be learned? And that's the question I want to do as fast as possible, because this cannot happen again.
Christopher at Westminster, thanks very much for you updating us with the political reaction. Thank you.
Stay with us. We're going to be talking about drivers with a non-ULEZ compliant vehicle who are going to be able to apply for a £2,000 grant from today. The detail on that after your headlines with Tamsin.
Pip, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 2:32. A senior manager who was in charge of nursing at the hospital where Lucy Letby carried out her attacks on babies has been suspended from her current role. It comes after the most prolific child serial killer in modern British history was given a whole life term. The 33-year-old was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 16. Lucy Letby refused to attend court today. Handing down the sentence, Mr Justice Goss said there was premeditation, calculation and cunning in her actions.
You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies. and in gross breach of the trust that all citizens place in those who work in the medical and caring professions.
Impact statements from parents were heard by the court this morning. The mother of one baby murdered by Lucy Letby says her experience in hospital was like something out of a horror story. Another said she was haunted by vivid images and that Letby had destroyed her life after 2 of her triplets were killed. And a further mother of 2 of Letby's victims, one of whom survived, called her absence from court today a final act of wickedness from a coward. Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government must change the law to force criminals to hear their sentencing.
We need to change the law. I hope the government will do it because I think it can be done very quickly. If they don't, we will force an amendment to appropriate legislation. But actually, my position is to invite the government to get on with it, to offer Labour support, so this could go through very, very quickly. This isn't the first case. The government has been dragging its heels on this. Get on with it for the sake of these victims and, of course, the other cases that went before it.
Well, you can get more on this story and others by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, the big read, my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The Met Police has confirmed that no further action will be taken after King Charles's charity, the Prince's Foundation, was caught up in an alleged plan to offer wealthy donors honours in exchange for financial donations.
Well, that complaint brought against the foundation in 2021 by the anti-monarchy group Republic. Newspapers had exposed leaked documents. Let's get more with our royal correspondent Cameron Walker joining us in the studio. And remember the publicity at the time involving Michael Fawcett and suggestions of suitcases of cash from the Saudi Arabians, all sorts of allegations.
Yes, it all got incredibly messy. Michael Fawcett was the former very close confidant of Charles, now of course King, but then Prince of Wales, tipped to be the next master of the household. That's essentially the chief executive of Buckingham Palace, but he had to essentially resign after this scandal erupted. He resigned as chief executive of one of the King's charities, the Prince's Foundation, after exposed information, I suppose, in papers appeared to show that he had offered a wealthy Saudi billionaire an honour, i.e. a knighthood, and indeed UK citizenship in return for a cash donation to King Charles's charity, which is where the suitcase of cash perhaps came from. So after he resigned, the Prince's Foundation launched an independent investigation and found that there was evidence of this exchange of information or communication, but none of their trustees were in fact involved. Now, the problem comes that it is actually a criminal offence to offer honours in return for cash. So the anti-monarchy group Republic, a couple of years ago, put in an official complaint to the Metropolitan Police against the King, when he was Prince of Wales, and Michael Fawcett. Now, the police started their investigation in February 2022. On the 6th of September, we found out today, that's 2 days before the late Queen died, by the way, that they questioned 2 men at a London police station under caution. Today, they have told us that they are taking no further action. So Buckingham Palace spokespersons today say, we have noted the decision of the Metropolitan Police. All other inquiries are a matter for the Prince's Foundation, and the Prince's Foundation said they want to focus now on delivering the education and training programmes of the Prince's
But we
Trust.
should make it clear there is no suggestion that the Prince, as he was King now, was one of those who was interviewed by the police, as far as we know.
Yes, as far as we know, the Prince, now King, was not interviewed by the police, and actually at the time, a Clarence House spokesperson, he had absolutely no knowledge of any of these allegations until the newspapers leaked the information. Metropolitan Police have told us today that no arrests or charges have been brought.
What's happened to Michael Fawcett?
Well, he is no longer employed by the royal household or anything associated with the royal household. A paper ran a story last year which showed a paparazzi photograph of him walking his dog down the London streets, perhaps living a life of solitude now. The Prince's Trust, from a statement we got today, appears to essentially wash their hands of him, but it's perhaps a bit of a spectacular fall from grace.
I mean, he was literally the right-hand man, wasn't he?
He was. I mean, he was rumoured to, at one point, actually put toothpaste on the Prince's toothbrush because the Prince has broken his arm in a polo match. So, you know, this is a guy who was incredibly close to the future king and is now no longer associated with him because of this scandal. It has been a cloud over Buckingham Palace, and particularly in the early days of the King's reign. And I think from speaking to people in Buckingham Palace, I think they very much want to move on now.
Buckingham Palace say they've noted the decision. King Charles is at Balmoral, is he still, for the summer?
Yes, he is, and today we've seen pictures of him arrive for an official welcome ceremony to Balmoral Castle. It's understood that he's actually been staying in his private property, Burke Hall, very close by with the Queen, Camilla, but he got an official welcome accompanied by his equerry, Johnny Thompson, a couple of military bands and regiments there
Or
as
just
well.
for the short hop from Burke Hall to Balmoral?
Yes, we saw pictures of him drive in the car from the Burke Hall estate to the gate of Balmoral Castle, and then he got out the car, greeted some of the soldiers and military personnel who had been there.
But something that is significant, we understand that Andrew and Fergie will also be attending the family get-together at
Yeah,
Balmoral?
this seems
is that
like
right?
a family reunion. People seem to forget that Andrew and Fergie, by extension, are still members of the private Windsor family. It's just because of clearly all the scandals that have happened with those two. They are no longer working members of the royal family. The papers are reporting that they have been offered Cregowyn Lodge, which is a kind of a house on the Balmoral estate.
That was the Queen's favourite, wasn't it?
Used to use. So they'll be staying there. We understand the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh are also expected to be going up at some point, and the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children as well. The King wanting to spend time with his grandchildren.
So the barbecue will be out? No.
Yes.
Well, the anniversary of the Queen's death is not far away, is it?
Not far, no, a couple of weeks away from that.
Yeah. Cameron, thanks for taking us through all that. Thank you very much indeed. Now, last year, the government announced a hydrogen strategy, all part of the UK's commitment to reach, yes, net zero carbon emissions by 2050.
But a row has now broken out in South Wales over a Japanese company's plans to build a hydrogen plant close to the centre of Bridgend. Our economics and business editor Liam Halligan brings you the details.
A hydrogen-powered bus drives through Bridgend, 20 miles west of Cardiff. It's a test model. The local council doesn't yet use hydrogen buses. Timoki Nishino hopes they will, while granting his company, the Japanese industrial giant Marubeni, permission to build a new hydrogen production plant here in Bridgend.
So we are building this solar and onshore wind assets near Bridgend and try to connect the green power as much directly to the electrolyzer as possible. So the people in Bridgend can proudly say this is as green as you can get the hydrogen.
Timoki explains hydrogen is produced via electrolysis, splitting atoms from water. Marubeni wants to power that electrolysis by building wind and solar facilities, creating zero-carbon green hydrogen. Timoki says Marubeni's plant could drive industry across South Wales. But hydrogen is highly explosive, and many Bridgend locals worry such a plant would be unsafe. Timoki insists his hydrogen project will bring wider benefits to Bridgend. He says millions of gallons of hot water, a byproduct of electrolysis, could be piped to this local swimming pool to help with heating.
This
Bridgend school, he says, could also get cost-effective heat from the plant. There is local support for net zero clean energy policies, and Bridgend's Labour-led council has allocated this site for Timoki's hydrogen plant, although the facility's yet to get full planning permission. Building and operating the new plant would create over 100 local jobs, says Timoki, and this is what it might look like. But many locals say the site's too close to other businesses and houses, given the risks of a hydrogen explosion. Nemian, an environmental technology manufacturer, is less than 100 yards away.
There are a plethora of issues with the proposal in terms of utility supply for water, for electricity, in terms of oxygen being vented out as a byproduct from the electrolysis of hydrogen.
Which makes for bigger fire hazard.
That does increase the fire hazard considerably. It reduces the required energy to cause ignition and therefore increases the likelihood of an explosion.
There are now regular anti-Highbont protests outside Bridgend's council offices. And at this cafe near the Highbont site, locals are concerned.
Our house was within the blast range, and it's not like a filling station, it's more like a refinery.
What concerns me is the lack of interest that the councillors have shown to the planning application, and they haven't looked at the details.
Some of Bridgend's independent councillors are also opposed.
Concerns with me about the lack of scrutiny, the lack of transparency, the incompleteness and incorrectness and misinformation from planning policy documents. So what I really think needs to be done now is this development needs to be brought back into the Welsh Government to make a decision.
Bridgend Council's due to make a decision this autumn. Timoki says Marubeni always puts safety first. The UK has just a handful of hydrogen plants, but dozens more are planned. Whether or not they're built may depend on what happens to this scrap of land in South Wales. Liam Halligan, GB News, in Bridgend.
Well, staying with net zero, because drivers with a non-ULEZ compliant vehicle will be able to apply for up to £2,000 to replace their car from today.
Yeah, all part of that expansion of the ULEZ scrappage scheme, open now to all Londoners, that has been announced by London's Mayor Sadiq Khan.
There'll also be more support for businesses, charities and disabled drivers. It's ahead of the zone being widened to cover the whole of the capital from next Monday.
Let's get more with Lisa Hartle, who is our London reporter, and I think you've got White Van Man there, without being too unkind about it.
Hello. Yes, well, we've been hearing a lot of stories today from a lot of people. So we're in Sutton at the moment. So the scrappage scheme has come into play here today in South London. I'm joined by Rhonda, who's a florist, and she's got a work vehicle, which we can see just here, and she's got her own personal car, both of which are affected and not compliant. So she's going to have to either pay £12.50 a day to drive each vehicle, or pay to have a new car, pay that scrappage scheme amount of money. Rhonda, how much have you been offered for your van or your car?
My car, I've been offered £2,000. I can't do anything with my car at the moment. I'm a carer for my mother, for my sister. So at the minute, the car's got to stay. I can't afford to get a vehicle. My van, they're not sure if it's the 5,000, the 7,000, or even if I'm compliant enough. So I'm still waiting on the decision coming back to decide where I go with that.
And so what happens then? Say if they do give you, do you have to scrap the car first, then you get the certificate, then they pay you? And
yeah. So I have to scrap the van at a place that they recommend, and then I have to send the certificate, and then once that's all gone through, they'll apparently put money into people's accounts. So, and even on doing that, being a carer, any money that goes into your account, because of the high percentage that it's supposed to be, it does affect people's carers' allowance.
So what are you going to do then with both the business, the van? Are you going to be able to, how much is a new van to replace this one that is compliant? Not a new one, but even if it's a used one.
If it's a used one, I could possibly, according to the people that I've spoken to, probably around 4,000 or 5,000. I try to keep my costs at a low. With COVID, with the pandemic, people are going through a crisis at the moment, but it's just hard every day going to bed. People's mental health is just being affected because it's a constant worry. So.
And you were telling me before that you think this should have been rolled out later down the line because there's a lot of things people are still getting over.
Yeah, I mean, I lost my shop to COVID, and then we went through the COVID pandemic. And even now, we're going through a living crisis, and to try and puzzle out where you're going to find £12.50 a day to care for your elderly mother. Even our local hospice and our cancer hospital's been affected as well, so it's just a constant worry on people.
I'm so sorry to hear that this is affecting you so much, but thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
No, you're very welcome, thank you.
So that scrappage scheme comes into play today, and the ULEZ expansion will roll out on the 29th of this month.
Lisa, thanks very much, and yeah, good luck finding anything worthwhile at £2,000, of course. That's part of the problem, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed.
Around 300,000 fewer top GCSE grades could be awarded this week in a shock to both students and parents. Exams regulator Ofqual has said that a return to pre-pandemic grading means that this year's result will be lower than last year and similar to pre-pandemic 2019.
Well, indeed, education experts predict that families may find that drop in their GCSE grades hard to accept. Joining us now, political correspondent Catherine Forster. And Catherine, proof in the pudding already with the A-level results, I guess, that, you know, people have had the warning already.
Yes, exactly. Last week's A-level results, there were 73,000 fewer top grades than during the pandemic. Now we have forecast that when the results for GCSEs come out this Thursday, top grades, that's 7, 8s and 9s, or A's and A stars in Wales and Northern Ireland, that those grades will be down by a huge 300,000. And Professor Alan Smethers from the University University of Buckingham has said that this will be a shock to many students and parents, and they're also going to find it hard to accept. And of course, this wild sort of volatility in A-level and GCSE grades is a direct result of the government's decision to close schools twice during the pandemic and to cancel exams twice, because what happened, of course, in 2020, they cancelled the exams. They replaced it with what Boris Johnson later called a mutant algorithm that had huge flaws in it and had to be abandoned in favour of teacher grading. The following year, the then Education Secretary Gavin Williams said he gave a cast iron guarantee that exams would go ahead. Not long after that, you've guessed it, he cancelled exams again. Teachers were left to give the marks. They went up enormously. Something like 45% of A-level grades were given at A and A stars. So now grades are being brought down gradually to where they were before the pandemic. But there's plenty of students not going to be very happy about it.
No, indeed. A hard lesson to learn, of course. Catherine, thanks very much indeed for updating us there at Westminster. Thank you.
And that has been the live desk on GB News today. Thank you for your company. We are back tomorrow. Up next, it is Patrick Christie's.
Stay with us for all the latest here on GB News. We'll be back tomorrow at 12 noon. See you then.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. For the rest of Monday, pretty warm across the south, with many places seeing sunny spells. There are a few showers around.